In the depths of a federal prison, a woman's life takes an unexpected turn. Her mother reveals a name that would change everything. Trump. Trump? Who is that? She asks. Her mother responds, "Mark my words, he will be our next president." This revelation sets the stage for a journey of discovery. As she grapples with her unjust sentence, the world outside is in turmoil. Surrounded by voices filled with hatred, she hears cries of violence. He should be assassinated. Put a bullet in him. Amidst the chaos, she finds her voice. She chooses to believe in a man who champions the marginalized. Through her words, she begins to uncover a truth that the world needs to hear. The outcry of gratitude from those who felt uplifted by 45 was undeniable. Speeches at the RNC convention were filled with praise, touching millions who watched President Trump receive the nomination again. This is her story of resilience, belief, and a different understanding of a man who fought for the forgotten. Join her in The People's President, coming soon. So here's to the fighters, the brave and the bold, with courage in our hearts.
Angels are not just for kids. By Kathryn Garten. Make yourself familiar with the angels and behold them frequently in spirit, for without being seen, they are present with me and you. St. Francis de Sales. Prologue. Beware of strangers, and you may be entertaining angels unawares. Hebrews 13:2. When I was a little girl, I lived with my cat. Our Abyssinian cat was named Charlie the Lonesome Cougar, after a TV show from the day. Her fur was gray, the color of a stormy day. She loved to sleep at the foot of my bed, and sometimes when I awoke, I would find her curled around my head. We had many pets over the years, and losing them brought my family to tears. Two were inseparable, our dog Jill and our cat Charlie. When my father walked our black lab Jill, Charlie walked right by his side, unconcerned. I would stare at the sight. It was not typical for a cat because cats are very independent, but Charlie was like no other cat. One night, after the family had gone to sleep, the house began to fill with smoke, a thick haze like a deep fog. In those days, my father smoked. The smoke was so thick, it could make a person choke. Our family would have all been consumed. They would have found us peacefully asleep in our rooms. But for that brave cat, Charlie saved us all. My dad had a habit of leaving his cigarette burning in the ashtray after putting it out. That night, it was still smoking. My father felt so bad afterward and shouldered the blame for all of it. The damage was minimal, but still, after that night, he quit smoking. If not for Charlie coming into my father's room because he sometimes left the door ajar, we might not have survived. That was one of the nights he did. Charlie leapt from the floor up to the bed where my parents slept. She knew what to do somehow. Charlie jumped to my father's chest and started to move her paws on his face. She licked his nose up and down until he awoke. Unable to speak, my father smelled the smoke and took seconds to register what was happening. He began to cry out, waking my mother to say, "Honey, the house is on fire. Get up, get out, get the kids," 5 in all. We were all tiny, and the youngest was 4 years old. My father came into my room, and he could hardly see me. The smoke consumed the air and singed his raven-black hair. He grabbed me without a thought and brought me down the stairs. He needed to get me out the door and place me on the ground. The cold air on my face and the gravelly ground woke me from a sound sleep. It was weird. I feared I had been walking in my sleep again. It happens from time to time. I didn't know why, but I was so cold. I needed to get back inside to the heat of my bed. I didn't even have anything on my feet. I got up as abruptly as I could, knowing I should be inside my bed. I raced up the stairs to my room to lay my head down and go back to sleep. After getting everyone safely out, my dad began to count and shout out all our names, noticing one was missing. He tried to run back inside. The fire chief sensed my father's grief and said, "What's the matter?" My father, beginning to shatter, replied, "I have to return. One of my daughters is still in there," making the fire chief aware of his missing child. The fire chief said with hope, "I'm on it." A smile emerged to calm the young father of 5, who wanted to make sure she was still alive. The fire chief took the radio in hand, talking to someone on the other end. A child still in the house, 2nd floor, in her room. The minutes I was ticked by. My dad began to cry. Then the silence slowly disappeared. "It's okay. We have her here. Bringing her out." My father breathed a sigh of relief. "Thank you," he said, taking me in his arms. I sleepily said, "Daddy," as he joyfully kissed my head. "Charlie, my cat, saved us all." He said to kiss me repeatedly, giving a silent prayer. Yes, baby, it was good that she was there. After that night, my grandmother, deeply rooted in her faith, told me when I was just a little, "Angels are not just for kids." She knew this all too well, and said to me that as I grew, I would know it too. I knew my story began here that night, but as I grew, I would know too. My grandmother would be proven right. She has left this earth, but from birth to death, with her very first breath, she always knew. Now I know too. Angels are not just for kids. Adults need to see them too. Past Chapter 1. How the two became one. A single mother who has been blessed by God all her life from the day she was born. Once upon a time, to her surprise, a woman who had already been blessed by God with a husband who adored her, a career she loved, and 2 sons to carry on her beloved husband's line. Her job, according to her faith, was accomplished. But God said, "Not yet, my gentle woman. You are far from done." "You are my beloved one," God said to the petite woman, who gave to others in need on a grand scale. She heeded the Lord and lived her life according to his word. God heard her pleas to him one night. "O Lord, forgive me. I know you have given me so much. I am so grateful that you touched my life with abundance and grace. That's why I feel so bad about asking. You must think me an ungrateful disgrace. There's not a trace of envy on my face. But you see, I love my sons, who are beautiful like their dad. I am so glad, but I need one more precious bundle of joy. I have the boys to fill my world now, to make it complete. Please answer my prayer and deliver a little girl to me." So God did just that. He blessed the loving, generous, and giving couple with the most beautiful little girl. She would be the image of her mother, like no other. The same brown eyes, the same hair, the color of rich, dark chocolate, the same nose, lips, and chin. But to everyone's surprise, that is where the similarities began and ended. The little girl, Angel, was incredibly blessed by God as a unique creature. Her most extraordinary feature was not just her beauty. She was indeed a cutie. She also had great tenacity, a spirit of courage and strength. Although she was not at first from birth, she was also the apple of her daddy's eye. He gave her all she desired, and her parents knew she was the spark that ignited their fire. She was never alone with her 2 big brothers at her side. She could not hide her pride in belonging to all of them. This family was blessed in many ways. God was impressed by their love, so their life was filled with prosperity and success. Before the loving couple met, God said to the man, "Not yet." The man was studying to be one of God's servants in seminary for a time. But God decided to circumvent that plan. He had another one in mind, the kind in which God had picked out an exceptional female so that he could tell the rest of the tale. God took the man aside one day and said, "I know you have been praying and studying my word, but I have heard your heart from the start. You are looking for something more. I know you love me, but I am sure you have a better way to show me by giving this woman I've selected for you to be your wife a good and righteous life. Present Chapter 2. The Angel Goes to Prison. Angela never thought she could feel so distraught. Years of tears were shed only inside. She fought her whole life, being a young mother, college-educated, intelligent, and once upon a time, a wife. Now, she recalls it was a hard fall. She had lost it all. When she is in despair, she remembers a prayer. God softly whispers in her ear, like a soft breeze blowing through her hair. The prayer she recalls from when she was tiny is the Serenity Prayer. The words come to life like the sharp end of a knife, especially now that she is in a room with a steel door and concrete walls. It feels to her more like a tomb than a room. There is no way out. Even if you shout, the doors are secured by a lock and key. There is no way out for me. There is the smallest window, enough to see a little bit of God's natural scenery, the picturesque sky of blue, but more so when the colors of the sky come into view, like the sunset on the horizon of that same blue sky. They are only in her head, the past sunsets, so vast once seen over the waters where she used to live. She was a southern transplant, from the Northeast initially, but the 9/11 event was too much for her to bear, a natural human catastrophe. It has brought her to the Florida coastline for many years now, to relax and heal her broken feelings from the losses she has never spoken of. She gave up the high end of New York, which was her choice, but now, in this place, her choices and her voice are not allowed. She is always so proud of her activist ways. That was not something she could do in this place, prison. This place did not let you have dignity, much less independence of thought. It brought tears to her eyes. 1 minute late for this or that would change your life. That happened to her more than once, but this particular event ripped out her very soul. It left a massive hole in her heart, which she feared would never start to heal. Her situation began within days of watching her beloved mother waste away. They were picture images of each other, daughter and mother. We even loved to lend our voices to sing for our God. God didn't just want us to sing in church. We sang everywhere. It may have looked as though she did not have a care, but my mother was a constant warrior in her later years. My eyes tear up just thinking about what her presence here on earth meant to me from birth, that she would serve the Lord. Mom could not afford to do it for herself. Her life had so many times she put on the shelf for her family and patients, especially when she visited me sometimes. It is a curse, because her being a nurse is not just an occupation but a vocation. She loved what she did and never hid from responsibility. She taught me how to love others unselfishly, like Jesus. I was down for 4 years, and my 82-year-old mother boldly got behind the wheel of her Dodge Charger Ram. She may not have been a speed demon at the wheel, but seeing her every visiting day was the balm that I needed to heal. She heard them call me to the visiting center because my mother had come from such a long way that day just to see her little girl, and it made my world go round. I was so happy to see her. Her smile lit up the room. She lit a fire under me to start writing. I admired her tenacity, a rarity in a woman like her. She could barely walk without a cane, but her age never slowed her down. Her faith kept her firm, which always kept me on my game. My world was rocked that day when I waited the whole day for my mom's visit, like a kid when a parent was supposed to show up for visitation day. I waited for hours to hear my name called on the loudspeaker, but I never heard my name that day. No way for me to know what happened, because we never knew what was going on the outside while you were inside. Communication was nearly non-existent, but I waited until I could call and found out my mother was in the hospital. I knew now why my mother did not come. It was not because she was tired of seeing me, like my sister said. My sister also told me that I was causing my mother to be sick and weak, and that coming to see me in federal prison was tearing her apart. I knew this was true, and I felt ashamed and guilty. I was scared for my mother's health, but she woke up while I was on the phone with my sister. She insisted my sister give her the phone. She said, "It is not true. It had nothing to do with you. Don't you ever think that way, and don't listen to anything your sister has to say." My mother said, "I'll be there soon." The day before visitation, I swore to her I would do something for sure. When I spoke to her, her voice was barely a whisper. It was fragile in her condition. She could hardly talk. She made me promise to sing at her service after she died. I heard her, but I cried so much I hardly understood. She also made me promise I would say one of my poems. I reluctantly told her I would, but I also told her she was not going anywhere. But it was no good. She wouldn't listen. She was adamant about it. I tried to shout it, but the warden was in my head. I didn't care. I didn't want my mother to go anywhere. I loved her so much I didn't know what I would do without her here. I finished the call, remembering her small voice. "Please sing a favorite song for me and say your beautiful poetry. Promise me." Okay. Later that day, after the main line, I was fine. I had forgotten the fear I had felt in my heart earlier. I got myself ready for Mass. The service was at 7 that evening. I was singing a solo, and the air was thick and muggy, not unusual for an August night. But what happened next told me something I did not expect. No one did. The service for the congregation was already underway. He was a wonderful, lively priest from Nigeria. I loved him for his zest for life. He was a wonderful, godly man. I will never forget what happened next. I was gravely upset and in despair when I began the song, a song that, it so happens, was one of my mother's favorites and was called "Gentle Woman." I had to summon all my courage from deep inside. Just as I was finishing the song, the air felt different. No sooner did that thought come to my head than the doors burst open, all the way to the wall. I hoped we were getting relief from the muggy, oppressive heat of the day. But it was not that way. I felt a whisper of a breeze and said a prayer just as the loving, godly priest pointed up with his hand and stared me straight in the eye. Why was this significant? The next minute shook me to my core. I stared at the door that flew open. It took place fast. Within minutes, the priest said, "Angela, your mother is not here anymore. She is up there." My mouth was agape at what I thought I saw, but I swore my mother came to listen to me sing her favorite song and say goodbye. That was one of those rare days when I knew what my grandmother told me was true. Angels were not just for kids. They were for adults, too. I just repeated the prayer's words in a plea like a lifeline. "Lord, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change." That day, what happened to me was something I could not change, but it was just the beginning of a significant journey for the wisdom to accept the things I could not change and to change the things I could. But to know the difference between the two, that would come later. What occurred after was not in my control, but it would touch the core of my soul. That wind came to me and kissed me on the cheek, a whisper of a thing. I could hardly speak, much less sing. Then, without warning, the priest said to me again, only with more conviction, "Your mom, as I said, is not here." He pointed to the ceiling, his finger in the air. "She is up there in heaven." It caused my heart to beat out of my chest. I tried my best to finish my mother's favorite song since she was listening to that heavenly hymn on her way to heaven. It was precisely 7 p.m. I went back to my unit to sleep, but I could not sleep that night. The next day, I could barely keep myself still. I needed to get to the day room to get on my email. My email account had an unopened message. I had received a message from my mother's good friend saying, "I'm sorry to say your mother went to God. She left us smiling. The time was 7 p.m. last evening. She wanted to say goodbye to you." I said. I knew what she would do. She came to kiss my cheek goodbye. I knew it was her. She was there. It was the answer to her prayer. Past Chapter 3, Angela's Guardian Angels. The loving, generous couple blessed by God's favor would savor the years, watching their little angel grow to be everything they expected of her. The years flew fast, like a beautiful blur, except for when she found herself in difficulty. You see, God told them, "Although you are my beloved ones, there will be situations too big for you, so you must come near me." Her God above gave Angela abundance, since he gave her unconditional love. She was never alone on her journey. They told me she was a wonderful child. They told me I had a smile like my mother and her mother before her. It radiated within. I gave my parents, I was told, many years of happiness and pride. There was never a day of trouble or worry. Although I was always ready to grow up, I wanted to break out into the world and smash the proverbial glass ceiling. Their ambitious little girl with big, wide eyes to see the world through. Her mother enjoyed her front row seat in her little girl's world. My mother said I was the family's crown jewel, precious with unlimited and priceless value from birth. It was entirely my big brother's intention to always, without fail, be there at every turn for my protection. But I did not know there would be others there, unseen, for my protection too. They were all around me, surrounding me, taking charge of me. As the 91st Psalm, the Protection Psalm, says, "This was God's secret to all his beloved children who believed God was real, not just a construct he would never tell. Those around her would surround her with miracles and spiritual light. At times they appeared as instruments of God in plain sight, ordinary humans. Angela instinctively knew that God had watchers who cared to be there when Angela did not know what to do. She would cry and say God's word, knowing she would be heard. Some thought she was absurd in the way she felt. The times when it was too much, she felt their spiritual touch. God has a plan. It was 24/7, and these unique spirits came to her from heaven. She asked God, "Please send me help." Before asking, he knew what she needed. That was God's miracle-working task. The events that brought help to Angela from above occurred throughout her life. They happened when Angela was a young wife in her 20s. She was strongly urged to advance to a career after graduating the same year. Pretenstavens chiquentdust. Chapter 4. The angel grows to be a woman. Angela would hold on tight with all my might to my serenity. At this point, I didn't know why I even wanted to. Prayer was my way of keeping an even keel. I would say it every day, sometimes more than once, sometimes 2 or 3 times. I usually waited until the doors were locked tight before saying it the final time. My God, how can I accept these things I cannot change? This was more than a phrase for me because I was highly independent. It was not my way to just let go and let God. But because of where I found myself these days, there was nothing else I could do but get on my knees and pray, "God, take me out of here, please." But that was not to be. The judge gave me a very extended stay. I was beside myself initially, but knew I had to toughen up and bear it. I recalled a scripture, Philippians 4:13. I can do everything through Christ who strengthens me. I prayed that I would have that strength even in this place, a federal prison. I did not feel at home in federal prison. Over the years, many people told me, "You do not belong here." Well, if I did not belong, what was I doing here? Where I did not belong. I was not the type to be told how or what to do, but there was no other choice here. I was a fish out of water without a clue. I was told when to eat, walk, shower, and sleep. In some cases, when I was in the county lockdown, the lights went out at 11 p.m. after the national count. We were counted as inventory in a store, not people, but products. At one time, life's necessities were free to do as I pleased. If I sneezed the wrong way, depending on the day and the CO in charge of the detail, something would happen to me. Everything was magnified as a wrong act, even things that were not considered criminal. It was called insubordination if you asked a question at the wrong time, meaning you were not asked for your input. I did not join the men's army, but I felt like I had been brainwashed. I would have been better off if I had joined the service. The government, the Bureau of Prisons, dressed us like little soldiers. We were women, but nothing. Our clothes, shoes, and daily routine was designed with women in mind. I had no control, and this made an ache in my very soul. I felt like missing pieces of a puzzle, never whole, like a lady in a box. For a long time, I was a shell of my former self. That is usually the truth when you find yourself oppressed and bound. At times, because of my situation, I felt confounded and despaired. I constantly felt the pressure of being locked in a cage. Inside, although no one could hear it, a rage inside me screamed to get out. I wanted to shout and say that it was unfair to treat human beings this way. Before I could say a word, the keys from the guards to close and lock the doors were all I could hear. I heard them for a long time in my sleep, so deep that it began to seep into my unconscious. My dreams were dark and scary, taking me to places so vile and destructive it made me so sad. I would wake up with tears on my face. I needed to find ways to erase what chased me at night when the lights went out. I tried everything I was allowed to have. First it was sleeping pills. I tried to use my will, but the nightmares and terrors still came. It rocked me to my very core. So where were those holy people now? I sorely didn't have a clue. So I knelt and prayed, "Please, Lord God, why are you not here? You said you would never leave me. So why am I afraid? Am I not your beloved one anymore? Because I guess I'm not good anymore." Past, Chapter 5. The Jordache Jean. A bone will never be broken. Psalm 34. No more faithful words were ever spoken, and never one bone was ever broken. I was barely 13 years old. I barely even spent a day in a hospital. I remember when the car hit me going more than 40 miles per hour. The driver began to accelerate just after coming from the corner, where the light had just turned green. I could hear the power of the engine roaring to life. Within seconds, without warning, that car lifted my body in it, along with my sister's bicycle and more than 100 newspapers I was delivering instead of my sister. My body came down hard on the asphalt, bringing the oncoming traffic to a sudden halt. The impact hit my body hard, but especially my head. Luckily, my head was as hard as my resolve. There were no bones broken. The doctors who destroyed my favorite pair of Jordache's jeans were all the rage at the time. I spent a whole month's allowance on them. Did I forget to mention it was not my intention to have my favorite pair? Jeans ruined that day. I could hear the emergency medical team at the scene of the accident ripping the legs of my jeans down the middle to see if anything was broken or fractured. I cried, not because I was in pain, but because all I could think, how was I going to afford another pair? They were expensive brand-name jeans. They were the only ones I had. I didn't have a spare. It was as if no one cared about my Jordache jeans. apparent evident. They didn't know about the latest fashion or what was important to a teenager. It was one of my passions. I was a clothes horse from the earliest I can remember. I loved to purchase the latest fashions and styles. The doctor, I remembered, was charming and had a lovely smile. However, his nice, pleasantly was not going to change that my favorite expensive pair of Jordans that I saved for a whole month to purchase was now going to be garbage. They were ruined. All they cared about was that I had been injured by a speeding car. My concern was how I was going to replace them. It was the latest style, and they were destroyed. Later that day, there was great joy on my face when later that day, while I lay in bed in an emergency, the doctor and his wife were the ones at the scene. One of the cars that was stopped by the cops, 3 cars behind in the late model beige-colored Mercedes station wagon. I was told when he came to look at me, that was when they ripped open my Jordache. The doctor and his wife came to the hospital to see about my condition. Well, he did, but it was her who handed me the big white box with the word Macy's across the top. I was elated with hope when I opened that big white box with the word Macy's stamped across it. That was one of the major department stores in the local mall, and it was close to the hospital. I felt like this was one of the best days of my life because I didn't have any broken bones, and the prayer was answered when I was wheeled out of the hospital wearing my brand new Jordache jeans. My mother was so happy to see me when I jumped out of the wheelchair, and my brother opened the car door so they could take me home. I have broken a bone not since that day until the present day. There were many accidents and falls along the way, but I never had anything that I couldn't get through with God and the angels by my side. The other experiences I had were way more severe by my account. There were other accidents over the years, but the most serious one was after I had been married a few years. We traveled extensively because of how hard we both worked. It was a good thing because after our honeymoon trip from hell, I believed our marriage was going to unravel, but we made up for that honeymoon from hell, finally. I could tell things were going to be okay. I was not going to dwell on one wrong moment, even though it was a honeymoon moment, and they were supposed to be sort of a kind of milestone. We needed to move on and leave the past alone, and thankfully we did. We had no kids yet, so we were able to travel a lot and make up for that trip from hell. Did we? What do you think? You better believe we did. Our next few trips took us everywhere. I mean everywhere. But it was just our luck that everywhere we traveled, there was something that would tug at our peace and happiness and tell us that we were angels, unawares. First, it was a trip to Rome, Italy. I had a perfect time. We visited some of the best-known places in that ancient city. The final destination on our trip was the Spanish Steps in the center of Rome. I met an Italian woman who took to me. I don't know why, but she did. She was very friendly and invited my husband and me to a large Italian feast at her restaurant during the time between 1 and 3 p.m. It was the end of the week, and the feast would be on Friday. But that Friday was not to be. The feast would have taken place between 1 and 3 in the afternoon. It was the time called a siesta. This was something they celebrated all across Europe, a time when people went out of their way to enjoy their food. Especially in Rome, Italy, they honestly did know the meaning of eat, pray, and love. This was also where the main seat of Catholicism was held. That city was a city inside of Rome, called Vatican City. It was one of the most fantastic cities to take a virtual journey back almost 2,000 years. So it hurt me very much because the night before that fateful Italian feast was a night I will never forget. It started with a bone-chilling stroll near the Spanish Steps. This was a very famous tourist place. But I was getting an extraordinary feeling, and I couldn't shake it. I'd had these feelings before my mom told me I was sensitive, like my grandmother was. Right. She once saw her son during World War II in a foxhole next to an angel. The vision was as if she was in that foxhole with her son. His body was blown up right next to him, but that angel she saw in her vision saved her son, as if there was a protective shield around her son, so nothing would happen to him. My grandmother was very Irish and very Catholic. Her faith was excellent in her. Her name was an essential hallmark of that faith, Grace Lamb. I miss her, like I miss them all. But I know they are with God, and I will see them again one day. But for now, the past is just that, the past. After dinner at the hotel near the center of the city, we were leaving the restaurant at the hotel under those famed Spanish steps. The minute we approached that famous tourist place, I got a shiver up my spine, and as I said, a chill, as if a cold wind had come across my path, and it continued throughout the night. It even woke me from a sound sleep. My husband looked at me funny. I just blurted out, as if an excited utterance without thinking before I knew what I was saying, that we needed to get out of Rome immediately. My husband, with his teeth gritted, asked me, "Are you crazy? Are you okay?" I said, "I know it seems strange because I was looking at Totaria's authentic Italian feast, but something told me that there was danger and we needed to leave the city immediately. We needed to get the first plane out in the early morning." At first, he argued with me, but I could not be swayed. Something was wrong. I had these feelings before I told him my grandmother did too. I tried to tell him the kinds of things that were bothering me earlier in the evening, and how it made me think of my uncle when my grandmother saw him in a foxhole next to an angel. This time, this feeling, this place was more substantial but very different, somehow real, an entity of its own. So we packed quickly, and I picked up the phone at our hotel room to ring the concierge. I told the gentleman on the phone after several rings. He answered, "Pronto," finally. I told him, I need to get the first plane out of this city as soon as humanly possible. It was done, and the car took us to the airport. Before leaving the car, I tried to call Maria's restaurant on the Spanish Steps, but something told me, what if they don't believe me? So when the woman answered, I just said who I was and that something came up and I needed to get home to the States. But I added that maybe it would be a good idea if they stay closed for the evening or open the one in Tuscany, which was about an hour away from the Spanish Steps on the Via Veneto, better than that far away from the Via Veneto. Once we arrived at the airport, it took a little bit of time. We got our luggage on and boarded the plane. The plane was supposed to get in line with the other planes on the runway to get ready to take off from the tarmac. It was taking what seemed like forever to me. I kept asking, what is taking so long? "We need to be out of here now," I whispered, yelling erratically, to my husband sitting next to me strapped into our seats. "This plane needs to lift off from this tarmac right now," I said. I even thought of leaving the plane if it did not move, but the angels were with us. They must have been listening to me because the captain asked the flight attendants in Italian to prepare the plane for takeoff. Minutes later, I heard the flight attendants begin to speak in broken English about the emergency exits, pointing to the front, back, and sides of the plane, where the word exit was in different languages. The first one about the open door before the flight attendant reached forward and closed, and turned the lock to the door, sealing it closed. Now, there was no getting away. We were locked in shut. I would have freaked, if not for the roar of the engines starting as a sign to tell me they were getting going, and I breathed a sigh of relief. That sigh was brief because it was within minutes the captain came over to the loudspeaker while the plane came off the tarmac. He wanted to say something. He tried to be as calm as he could so as not to upset anyone. Maybe nobody else noticed the trepidation, almost fear in his voice, but I did. He stated it as bravely as he could. There has been a bombing on the Via Veneto at the Spanish Steps a few minutes after the noon hour. There are no further details. If we get any, we will keep you all advised. My husband took one look at me with his mouth agape, grabbing and holding me in a tight embrace, making me gasp for breath while tears began to fall from my eyes. After he was able to release his hold on me, after the shock wore off, we began to ask the flight attendants if there were any injuries or survivors, or, as I crossed myself, if there were any deaths. They only answered, "No information is available at this time." Later, we found out it was terrible. Even though Maria's restaurant was in the Ground Zero Center, they were closed and relocated to her other restaurant in Tuscany. Weeks later, I received an email from her thanking me for saving her family. He was placed on the Spanish Steps was a loss, but there was no loss of life after reading the email. I dropped to my knees and thanked God for the early warning signal and that I paid attention, because I knew it was not my time or God's plan. I have been saved like that more times than I can count. The big 9/11 event, which took place later in New York. I was supposed to be in the city where the towers came down that day, but again, those better angels of mine were in play. The reason I say this is because I woke up the night before from a sound sleep. I was in excruciating pain. My mouth was on fire. I remember it to this day because it never happened before or since. I had a very high threshold for pain, and I still do, but this was throbbing like an uncontrollable heartbeat inside my mouth. It was an abscessed tooth, maybe needing a root canal. I could not get back to sleep. I called my dentist's emergency number. I didn't even know dentists had emergency numbers. I made that call in the wee hours of the morning between popping painkillers like they were candy. I have never had this kind of pain in my life. My mouth is on fire. I said to the person who answered that line, "You are a godsend." He called right back within minutes, and my husband took the phone because I was in so much pain. The dentist told him there was no need for her to talk to me. I could hear her screaming in pain from here. Just tell her to be in my office in a few hours, around 7:30 a.m. The next call my husband made to my boss. I was still feeding pain pills into my mouth, handing me the phone as I reached for it. I said to him, after getting on the line, "I am unable to make the meeting in the morning." He heard my pain through the phone. "I'll let you know what is said in the meeting." He went to my place. I am not joking. The tower came down, and my boss was taking my place, literally and physically. I tried to get him to postpone. "Can't we reschedule? I want to be there." "No, we are on a deadline." Now that I think about it, a poor choice of words, a deadline. The meeting was around 34th Street, in the same vicinity as the towers. It just so happened today, September 11th, 2001. Nobody could know what was going to take place on that fateful morning, with losses of nearly 3,000 people. The number 3,000 was only the one in the tower that day. It did not count the number of people that were lost who were in the vicinity of those fateful towers, or the first responders who came to help rescue those lost and clean up the debris from Ground Zero. I was supposed to be there, but I guess something stepped in. My mother called it divine intervention because it was not my time or God's plan. I remember driving to the office after my dental emergency had passed and hearing on the radio in my car that a plane had hit the World Trade Center towers in New York City, and that was when my heart stopped. I arrived at the office thinking about what I just heard, so I walked in the door overhearing it again. I thought it was a replay. Like in sports, let's go to the instant replay. But it was another plane they were talking about that went into the middle of the other tower, said the news anchor on the TV in the break room, where I found everyone in the office. They were all there except one, my boss. His brother reached out for me, not the real touchy-feely kind of guy. His was a commercial construction company. None of the partners, 3 in all, were that way. The one I was closest to was the one not there. His brother told me his brother left in the early morning. He said something about the commute to the city. My blood froze in my veins. He went. My thoughts trailed off. It had a profound effect on me and still does to this day. I spent weeks asking questions of my priest. Why? He just took my hands in. I was supposed to be there and asked if I was escaping danger in my life. He had no words for me, no enlightening insight from God's word. He just said, "It is not your time, it's His time. It is WWI will." I said many times that this was a blessing, but also a curse. The guilt of still being alive when there were too many times in my life that I had no other words for it. I should have died, but I didn't. I had no answers but the one I did not want to believe, that heaven was protecting me at every turn. It didn't matter what age he was, 79, 9, 11, or 37, he was always under the wing of an angel. I wanted any other plausible reason, except the one that was continuously chasing after me. You see, I feared telling anyone of my feelings, suspicions, premonitions, whatever you wanted to call them. I was an intelligent woman, well-educated, well-traveled, a businesswoman who mixed in circles of other intelligent, educated people. What would people say? If they knew what I truly experienced at certain times in my life, they would pull down the curtain on me, literally and physically. No one would ever believe what I had gone through. I sometimes don't think so for myself. I thought it was true, but I did not even believe it. Ask, seek, it will open to you. Plausible. All the years after that day taking off from that tarmac in Rome, Italy, and the 9/11 event were just the tip of the iceberg, sort of. The other trips we took were full of adventure, especially the ones I will never forget. The faff all took, hooking my body as if I were a Gumby doll, rubbery, and unable to stand after falling through the air off a 3-story staircase in a restaurant in Hong Kong Harbor. It was a jumbo junk, which was an ancient ship turned into a 5-star Michelin Guide restaurant. It was nothing less than a modern-day miracle, another one for me, and to this day I can't explain any of it, either the fall itself or what happened after it. How I am still around to tell you about it. Those who saw in their eyes a red sequin-clad lady with heels to match falling through the sky. It was indescribable and unbelievable. If I had not been there, I would never believe it happened to me. That kind of fall would have killed anybody, but not me. Then, thin days of that fall. Not only did I not break a single bone, not crack my skull, or lay in a hospital bed in traction while in a foreign country, but instead I was walking, talking, and even dancing in a nightclub in M.A. Macau, Hawaii, on a boat that flies across the water like a cloud of air. My husband at the time called it a hydrofoil or something. I don't know, but it was as unique as the bullet train, rode in Japan, in the earlier part of the same trip. That failure, I said to this day, was unexplainable, so it was chalked up to my better angels at work on my behalf, Gain. They took me under their wing. My life, because of how things have evolved for me. The divorce from hell. After the baby, which he was not supposed to live next to me in the maternity ward, was a woman my age. His husband was even a doctor, but she did not make it. She woke up in a coma after she had a stillbirth, and the baby died inside of her. The same situation, but she lost everything. Why, as I saved myself from going through something more devastating, soon would be the ultimate faff-all, the worst of all. There were so many things that needed to be done to get this agreement in motion, to help me save my home and my kids. All that mattered was my kids having a home and a future. As I read the email, my face changed more than once. First, confusion, then uplift. Finally, the grin on my face went from ear to ear. There was a real estate investor who agreed to my terms and was willing to give me $150,000. My ship had come in. My bread came back as a loaf. There were stipulations, but nothing I did not anticipate. I was so happy I did not know what to do first. Then I thought, kids, we are going out to eat at Longhorn. This was our favorite restaurant, and I had a credit card for emergencies. This was an excellent reason to use it. We are celebrating, she said. God and Mommy have saved the day. That man and his money investment saved my life. It was sad that we lost touch with each other. The market was tainted, and I was unable to sell the property after the work was done. It hurt my heart. The first deal was a big success. I made him $30,000 on top of his investment. We were both happy. He was so glad he gave me another $150,000 to do another deal. The second time was around. Not so fortunate. I lost the money. It is now 5 years later. It broke my heart not to come through. I was distraught. I knew I would get it back to him. Then I was indicted. I needed to make the sale. This time I did, but his lien was still on the property. So we needed them, the man and his wife, to release the lien. That was when I found out the man, my angel, had died. I was devastated, like the world was collapsing around me. I still needed the release for the sale. I felt bad. His wife didn't want to hurt me. Her son, on the other hand, wanted the money that I owed. The man's wife, my second angel, said, "No. We are not going to punish this woman. This is not what your father did this all for, not what he would have wanted." So, she signed off on the lien for only $5,000, releasing the lien so the house could sell on time. I still got convicted, but I had peace of mind knowing my family would be okay while I was serving my prison sentence. I will never forget this man. And I know God will allow me to be blessed enough to bless others because of the blessing this angel on earth gave to me and my family. It's funny, someone told me the other day, you can't ever catch a break. I thought after the fact that God doesn't give breaks, he gives blessings for breakthroughs. Oh, one more thing. I never laid eyes on this man or his wife, ever. So everything I do, I know God is blessing me and wants me to have abundance. He loves me, not just in my needs, but in my wants and desires too. God's love takes many forms. Sometimes, like this, it was a business deal to save a single mother and her 2 kids. Present, Chapter 6. The Toilet Bowl Lid. Finding myself here was something I had to resolve myself to. I could not solve any of the issues. So I just saw the roll of toilet tissue. We had more than enough. I was refined and grew up too well. It made my stomach roll when I had to live all day and all night looking at an open toilet bowl. I went out of my way in my old life to find something to always put a pretty cover on, so I could pretend it was not there for the moment. I defended my supper cost thinking, but in here, who cared? I did. I took an institutional towel, rough as sandpaper. I used that Cone's towel to cover the open hole in the stainless steel toad. I don't know why it bothered me, but it did in my old life. It always had a pretty lid. The store had so many different varieties to choose from. I used to buy the whole set. Some were girly and frilly. Now when I think of it, a toilet bowl and tank cover. This was just what you did. Now, it seems so silly. All I have is that old puke green towel, most likely washed until threadbare, and used by every inmate in the facility. I just thought how I couldn't wait to wrap a vast, thirsty, plush-combed cotton bath sheet around me, the smell of freshness surrounding me, as if a big hug, as a little girl from my mommy. But now it's not to be of all things while inside to be brought to my mind. It is the little luxuries I miss and remember the most. I will not boast of all I had. It was a lot. I almost forgot how well off I was. Manopedes in natural spas are different from those with plastic wash basin. This was the memory I was erasing. The chance to cut hair was shot in the dark because all we could have been fiscused scissors, not even a decent comb to make a part. I had all I needed to be glad out there. Why couldn't I be satisfied? Did I think I needed more? Oh God, I prayed as I fell prostrate to the floor of my concrete and steel cell. I shouted out aloud, "I know you will let me go when it is your plan and not the plan of man. So, I will hold on as best I can." My thoughts went to times when I pictured that I had been through it all. My daughter warned me to see how important it was to march for those who were lost to cancer. So, inside, every year, there was a walk. The whole compound of 1,500 women would walk for the Breast Cancer Awareness Foundation. It made me remember how restful it was for me, a 27-year survivor, to thrive and count. Was this all there was to be? It brought me back 2 decades into my past. Chapter 7. The Cancer. After everything that shook and rocked my world 2,000 miles away, not a single bone was broken. I was such a little girl, but at that time, I felt like a woman. I said, "God, are you through with me?" God replied, "Don't fret, not yet. I won't ever forget," as Psalm 34:20 says. The fall down the stairs was more than enough, but I thought my life was finally beginning to turn in a new direction. I wanted calm seas and peace, but it wasn't even close. The answer I got was not the one I wanted. I was not in control. It was a shock to my system to find out I was diagnosed with breast cancer. Actually, 2 types for me at the same time. One was not detected or even suspected until the day of my surgery. There was much urgency. I had 2 operations and my body felt broken and bruised. On that day, of all days, my husband dropped me off in front of the hospital doors saying, "I've had enough. I know it will be rough, but our marriage is dead." This was the day I had dreaded in so many ways. His words echoed in my head. "I'm sorry, our marriage is dead." I thought about our little boy and asked, "What about him? What will he do?" My husband said he wanted custody, but he was leaving me. I gathered my strength and told him, "You can go, but you will never get custody of my little boy. He's not a toy to be tossed around. You can leave our marriage, but you are taking nothing with you. God will deliver a solution to your kind of greed and pollution. You will not infect me and my son." I knew I was always a virtuous woman in God's eyes. With a fighting spirit and a smile, I pulled the door toward me and entered the hospital lobby. I couldn't wait to face my fate. I thought the operation would be the hardest thing for me to deal with, but I had to steel myself for real dread, because now my marriage was dead. At least I didn't have to wallow in my illness. It was a blessing in disguise. I could focus on raising my son and providing him with a bright future. I was not alone. I had my baby boy to fight for, and I was determined to raise him to be a wonderful, prosperous, and righteous young man. It was God's plan. I had to include this story in my book because it was important. One very sad day when I was still incarcerated, I couldn't be there for my daughter as she took her last breath. I was devastated and frustrated by my inability to hold her, hug her, and tell her, Mommy loves you. I couldn't be there for her and her little boy because I had no control over this situation. My little girl died in February 2022, and I didn't know what to do. I should have been out of prison. I had gained all the First Step Act credits. If I had been released in 2021, maybe I could have helped her, loved her, and been there for her. Now, I wait for God to tell me what to do. I pray, thank Him, and know that my little girl is up there with Him, sitting at His right side next to our Lord Jesus Christ. I think of the Serenity Prayer more these days, and reflect on the days, years, and haze of my tears. I think of all the time I lost and the cost. My baby girl is now in heaven with the eternal boss. We cannot change what we cannot accept, but we can change what we can. I wonder when I will see her again, my little girl, my best friend in all the world. This is not the beginning or a bitter end, but a story of prosperity and abundance. It's a hollow feeling sometimes, but then I remember all I can do is pray and ask God, is it so? Angels are not just for kids. As adults, we need them too. This will be further expressed throughout this book. I hope you read on and make your own choice about the angels in your life. Present. Chapter 8. The Jaguar. To do this, I looked out my window while watching the wind blow across the yard of the large federal prison facility where I was housed, along with 1,500 other women. It's early spring, and I wish I could sing for the joy of birds flying outside my concrete, steel, and glass cell. I wish I could go out long enough to watch the flowers bloom in front of the building outside my room, but it's not to be, as we have been locked down for a year or more. A tear falls from my eye. We know why it's so futile to cry. Many ways to say goodbye are not on my terms. We are told what to do, and how many hours we can be free from our cages. It's outrageous to look at the view they allow us to have. I feel like one of those sleeping cats, like a jaguar. On the outside, my favorite car, a seafoam green Jaguar with a white leather interior, gave me a sense of freedom and independence. It's quite a contrast. That type of steel and glass gave me freedom, while this steel and concrete won't even let me move. The irony of how concrete makes a person stuck in one place is poetic. If you put someone into men and let it set hard as concrete, they are down, like the chains around me that confound me. I have often found in my thoughts, while bringing to mind the kind of books I read and later wrote, that they were either about being free or trapped. There are too many inmates from the street in here. Sometimes it's like I'm in a foreign country. I've traveled extensively in my short life. Now I know why God planned for me to see all the different places and cultures. I've suffered through 8 long, oppressive years. There are more for sure. I pray this is not God's plan, but man's. I'm thinking of my son, who got entangled in this mess. I addressed myself. It's my fault he also got caught up in this situation. It fills me with guilt and frustration. I remember the words the USA used to describe me. Here is a mother. Don't bother to feel sorry for her because she is unfit and got her son involved in it. This tore me up inside. I just wanted to hide. My beautiful boy, whom I protected all my life, is now going through the stress of life as a felon. I was yelling and fed into what the prosecutor said to me, but then I thank God for allowing my son to make it through. I prayed and prayed. There was nothing more I could do. I thought as I prayed, thank God for giving me my son. His birth was nothing short of a miracle. Still, he felt that he had so much to prove in life, definitely not to me. But you see, he felt despair because his father did not care. He always carried this feeling around with him. I blame myself for my son's incarceration. It was such devastation when, after my conviction, they chose to go after him. He had his whole life before he just passed the FAA license exam. He loved planes and how they worked. The blow crushed him. Only he could know. He was not to blame, but it made me remember that blistering cold day in January 1991, during a blinding winter storm when he was born. The ambulance had carried me to the emergency room at Union Hospital because of my conditions, for sure, but they were turned into God's miracle-working power. My son has celebrated many milestones after all he's been through today. He is now 30, married, with his son. I could be no prouder. It makes me praise my God even louder. Still, I pray daily at the foot of my steel bunk bed. It's out of my control. It's in God's hands. I know this in my very soul. He said in Deuteronomy 31:6 that he would go before us, never fail us. These were the promises he made to us, to have courage and not to be afraid. Past, Chapter 9. My son's birth, a miracle. Here we go. The past has given me many miracles, but this was the biggest. The baby at the time was so tiny he wasn't even supposed to live. It was a touch-and-go scenario. The weather was telling the story. It took hold of the northeast like a polar beast, gripping everything and everyone by the throat in its path. Its wrath was so strong and mighty that cars were ordered off the roads, not to roam, but to stay in their warm, protective homes. It was a fateful day when loved ones clung to each other. No one ventured out unless they had no choice but to do so. This was my predicament. I was pregnant with my first child, and I wanted nothing but joy and happiness. It turned out to be the worst catastrophe of my life so far. We had to get into our BMW 325e. We didn't have to drive very far, but because of the blizzard obstructing our view, it was not soft and flaky, but hard and icy, hitting us like sharp knives. Our car was surrounded as if something evil was isolating us in that country road to the small hospital. Things went from bad to worse, giving us blow after blow with each cold hour. Before anyone moved, we watched the snow fall, first in inches and then in feet. The weather was so bad, it had to be approved for us to leave. But once the authority was given, my husband would have driven to the end of the earth to ensure his son's impending birth. The baby was not supposed to arrive until March that year, but God had a different plan. My ordeal was nothing short of a miracle that cannot be explained except by divine intervention. This was not my intention, but it was the sort of miracle when it comes to life and death, deciding who is more expendable, the mother or the baby. Thank you, God. The Father. Thank you, God. The doctors were not very dependable. Along with the visual press, I did not know it would be a son. He was not supposed to be viable. His fate was in the capable hands of the doctors who God chose. I say it this way because these were not my regular doctors. They were selected because of circumstance, nothing that just happened by chance. Some would say it was by chance, but those would be the ones who did not believe in divine intervention. I say it was not luck. Nothing could be further from the truth. My doctor did not show up, and I was unconscious, so I did not know. I knew God was in charge. It was a dangerous journey during the barrage of snow coming down, as sheets of freezing rain turned to ice, making the road slick and treacherous. As I lay on that gurney bouncing around with several IVs hooked up to me to keep me and my unborn baby alive, the 40-minute drive turned into 2 hours. The ambulance, the only vehicle on that slick, icy road, finally reached the hospital. This was one of those days they wanted to stay behind those glass emergency doors, but they knew they had a job to do. Everyone in the emergency room was in a hurry to get to the patients. They could see after delivering the baby that they were losing me. I was slipping away. I told myself this was my last day on earth. At least I had breathed, and my baby was to be. The story was still ongoing, and nobody knew what the end would be. Only Jesus was to finish my last novel. It was minutes, but it felt like a dream. They lost me on the table. My mom was cleaning the cups, and I laughed at what the doctor called medical death. The doctors worked tirelessly to bring me back to life, but I was giving them a hard time. I didn't want to come back. I tried but could not take a breath. My death was not natural, but I still, to this day, can't tell you what I saw. The experience was so much more than that. There were bright lights, and I saw my grandma surrounded by a glow of golden light. Beside me was a heavenly presence. As I said before, it was surreal. The next thing I knew, I saw the whole operation from the ceiling of the operating theater. There I was, flying overhead while my body was technically dead, watching the doctor struggle to get the baby out. My stubborn will was fighting with my need to be with my seed, my offspring. But here's the thing. I had spent my energy and felt broken and defeated. I repeated that it was okay if it turned out this way. I knew my baby had so many people who would be there for him. That sweet little cherub. I didn't need to be there, but the angels were saying prayers, and my grandmother behind that golden light said, "You need to be there to raise your child. This is the only way anyone else can do it the right way. You are a new person, and this is the first day of the rest of your life. You may not be a wife soon, but you will still be his mother, and no other person can take your place." Then I heard the doctor say, "She will be okay. We got her back. Nobody's dying today." Days went by before I was finally out of the coma. I found myself unable to speak. As I emerged from the hazy fog and my mind came into focus, I saw a woman sitting in the chair next to me. I knew she was speaking, barely coherent, but I could see her lips moving. She was saying, "Your son is okay. He's small, but he's alive." I wanted to cry. I was not sure what I saw because I remembered at least a week or more waking up with something medical clogging my throat. A man in a white coat was there, and I was in and out. I put my hand on my flat stomach, wanting to shout, "Where's my baby?" I was thinking this was also God's plan. Instead of joy for my baby boy, I felt dread that my baby boy was dead. I wanted to say to the friendly volunteer with her soothing presence, "Is he dead? Did I lose him?" But nobody could hear my cries. The sound of my words was deafening in my head. The friendly volunteer, at least in her 40s, with a kind smile and a soothing presence, saw the sadness and fear in my eyes. She surprised me with a pad and pen and said, "Write it out so we can communicate." She waited in anticipation of what I would put on the paper. My pent-up frustration made my writing wobbly and hard to read, but I managed to write, "Is he dead?" She took the paper and shook her head back and forth. "No, he's tiny," she said. It made me glad and sad at the same time. She stroked my cheek and said, "Little mommy, he's not dead, but he's small." Then there was a call into the room. I heard over the speaker connected to the high-tech heart machine. Yes, she's awake. My mother and a nurse were asking questions and reading my chart. Being in the medical field for many years, my mother knew what was happening. I scanned the room with my eyes as if it were a periscope on a ship, sneaking up to observe the movement and eavesdrop on a conversation about my life. It was as if I was not even in the room, and they were speaking of someone else. The volunteer leaned closer to me, taking a tissue from her smock pocket and wiping the tears from my flushed face. She said, "Little mommy, your baby boy is a joy. He is small and in the NICU, but he is very much alive. From what I've seen these days, both of you will thrive. So don't worry or fret. God did not forget what he promised you." You may not be Sarah, but you are also his beloved daughter. As he can make wine from water, God is one to trust. You're safe in his embrace, in this place. You must understand God is just. No matter what happens to you, you must never forget this, because you are highly favored and wonderfully blessed. I never believed in God's hand being in my life. It had been such a difficult road, so much to bear. She wiped my tears, saying, "No fear, my little one. Angels are not just for kids." I looked at her with wide eyes like a child on Christmas Day. She leaned closer, focused on my face, and said something that surprised me. "I haven't seen you since the accident with the dog. It looks good." How could she know? "Well, my dear, sometimes we entertain angels unawares," she said. She nodded to me when I previously wrote on the pad, awaiting the answer to my words. I wrote, "My grandmother told me there are angels present on earth." She nodded her head up and down, supporting me. With a quivering hand, I wrote, "Are you one?" She took the pad and pen, saying, "You need to rest. We are all here with you, watching over you and your son. We have been here all your life, Angela." She knew my name. "There will be so much more for you," she said, as she settled into the chair and took a small Bible from the square pocket of her light blue smock. To this day, I still can't put it all together more than 30 years later, but I knew it then, as I know it now. He has always been with me and my baby boy, born at 28 weeks, weighing 2 pounds, 3 ounces, and 19 inches long. Today he is healthy and robust, with a son. Today I speak to him every day when we are let out for a time to think. My world is ordinary, but nothing could be further from the truth. Being here in federal prison has been a long, unending, and unjust sentence. I stand here with the phone in my hand, listening to the dial tone, and then I hear nothing but my son's voice. Present. Chapter 10. My Mother's Story. The loss of my mother was so life-changing that I had to rearrange my life, exchanging my fear for faith. I could not erase the loss, but I would grow from it. Who knows? We have a seed that I did not sow. My mother would know what to do if she were still here. She would still kneel and pray in her way. It was the only way I could get through the days and nights. My mother was a picture of my soul. She helped me make myself whole. However, it was only sometimes that way. For a long time, that was the most significant loss of all because towards the end, we became the best of friends. She was there for me. Being thrown in federal prison can rock someone's world and bring them to their knees. That was what happened to me. There was nothing else to do but mourn the loss and cherish all the memories. That was all I had left, a wonderful, generous, selfless woman. I can't wait to get out so I can be the best mother to my kids, just like my mother was to me. I had no choice but to believe, be strong and courageous, and go forward through the fire. God told me the fire would make me strong and that I could handle anything, but I needed clarification. After everything I read in His Word and all I had heard, I thought God didn't want us to be strong and confident enough to do for ourselves. I was always told not to lean on our understanding, Proverbs 3:5, but to learn to put all our burdens and cares on Him, 1 Peter 5:7. As I said, my world went out of control the day my mother died. I tried to tough it out, but it was not to be. My heart was broken. My mother had left me. If that was not bad enough, the night Mom died, I cried. I didn't eat or drink anything either, just my luck. Did I say that luck is not a good thing for Christians and believers? Sometimes I still can't explain it any other way. So the night was driving hell. Oh well, there was no wind. That was well during. What else would it be called? So, as I recall, I was singing my mother's favorite hymn. She had just made it through a severe case of the flu. This was August 2016, not even close to the 2019 coronavirus. There is no justice. Are we all too righteous? But I digress. Okay. I was saying my mother came through the flu. We all prayed for her to go through. She rallied at the last minute and pulled through that terrible flu that grabbed her and wouldn't let go. I spoke to her on the phone from the camp counselor's office. That was when my mom said, "Sing my favorite hymn for my eulogy and memorial." I told her, "Mom, I'm going to be fine," before the FBOP disconnected the line. As I began to say a little while later in the day, here I was in church for the weekly service that night. I tried to forget what my mother had said earlier that day. Then, with no warning at all, the church doors blew open. I still don't know how. It was not even a gust of wind. The air was dry and muggy, as hot as the desert. This was strange. The weather report did not mention a sudden gust of wind coming through Florida that day. That wind was not like a solid, cold winter wind. It was like a feather whistling itself in front of my face. I felt it come to kiss my cheek. A whisper of a thing surprised me at first glance, and then my eyes widened. I could hardly speak, much less sing, without wanting everything to stop. The priest pointed to me, saying, "Your mom is not here. She is there." As I saw him point to the ceiling, his finger in the air, saying, "See? She's up there." My heart jumped out of my chest. I tried the best I could to finish my mother's favorite song. It took a few minutes to register that I saw her on her way to heaven at 7 the night before. I was sure it was her who blew open those doors just now. The realization knocked me from the small brown plastic government chair and took me to the floor. I had had enough. I could not deal with it anymore. I cried out as if someone was screaming inside my head. She was screaming, telling me my mother was dead. The woman next to me at the adjacent computer station ran to me and held me tight. I clung to her with all my might. She asked me frantically what was wrong. She saw the email and quickly scanned the contents. She didn't have to ask anymore. She knew. Now that woman, I didn't even know her. The whole thing was a blur, but she was there for me. All I could do was cry and tell her I was sorry. "Mommy," she told me, "it's okay. I know. I forgive you. I love you." So that day put my life on a difficult journey. My trajectory was still not what I wanted, but the control was no longer mine. In many ways, I was spun. It was time I knew that my story was being written by someone I knew, but I had no idea where it was all going. God said not to lean on my understanding. I said, "God, I'm giving it all up to you from now on." As my grandma used to say, let go, let God. So that is what I'm doing. That is what I did. Past. Chapter 11. The dog bite. Mother and daughter. I couldn't do anything right in my mother's eyes. I had so many of my ways. There were days my mother threw up her hands to God in holy surrender, saying, "That girl, she lives in her world." I remember giving my mother so much grief. It was a relief for me that she was there. You see, today was a typical day like any other day. My mother was bogged down with kids and her career. She was a nurse part-time and a full-time cook and bottle washer. She was more to me because I never got to see her. Oh yeah, she was there at night to tuck us in and say our prayers, but for the daylight hours, I never got to have a mother. She was never around. I found myself taking all my anger out on God. I hated everything, and every day after that accident in August changed my life. The life of a little girl would never be typical again. I would never be normal again. I would be looked at like a leper, a monster. Kids would call me names that I could not even pronounce. As I said originally, I hated everything and everybody after that day. I don't know how to explain it any other way, but the only one who was there for me was my mother, the nurse. Her being there was not such a curse after all. It was a godsend, still a miracle. It all started with a long drive to my grandma's house. The more we sat in the car, getting further and further away from home, the heat was so bad. It was stifling in the back of my mother's car in Long Island, New York. The sun was beating down on the road, baking us like an oven. Home was a family of 5 with 2 incomes in the household, but there was always a lack. So, my mom's extra shifts had to pick up the slack. She dropped us off, saying she would be back soon. My grandmother came out to greet us and wrapped us in her arms for a big bear hug. The sweat poured off us from the car trip, and the heat had a tighter grip as the day wore on. We found the kid next door to play double dutch and catch until we were all pretty tired from the ride and playing out in the sun. We were already saying it was a scorching day and wishing we had something to cool off. At that moment, we heard the familiar song coming around the corner, the big fan whirring on my grandmother's front porch, competing with the Good Humor Man and his cones and ice. It would be nice. We all agreed if we could get a pop to ward off the heat. My grandmother called me to the porch to give me the money. "Here, honey, get enough for all of you." I kissed my grandma and ran to the truck, saying, "We want 4 pieces." "Okay, that will be $1, the man said. So I counted out the silver coins with the eagle, totaling 4 in all, making $1. "Here," I said, handing him the quarters. I tried very hard not to fall with the cherry red ice in my outstretched hand. At that moment, it burst out of the porch screen, hurling itself, whirling me around with its gnashing teeth. All I saw was it throwing me to the ground. I yelled as that dog mauled me. The scream ripped through the humid air. It was a miracle my mom was standing there. She had just arrived back from work and heard the wrenching sound of her little girl in peril. In less than a minute, my mother threw a rock, knocking the dog off me, but she could not see that the dog was destroying me. It was so much blood and confusion. My mother, cool as a cucumber, took me in her arms and placed my little body, screaming with pain, on the ground. The medical staff worked like a bullet through my face and on my hands, trying to fight off the dog as much as a little girl could, but it was to no avail. I don't know what I would have done if my mother had not shown up when she did. It was great timing, or more appropriately, a miracle. It was just the beginning of the suffering I went through, the problems that came along with the damage, bruises, and scars. It was not bad enough that I had to have more than 150 little stitches through the center of my face. There was also the issue of my breathing. My nose was torn off my face. My mom held my hand while a local anesthetic was given to me. They could not put me under, so I had to hold still. I told her I didn't feel it, but that was a lie. I felt everything. The other side was close to my throat, so close it could have been my last thought as I lay there, dead from my injuries. This is why I can call it nothing but a miracle. God helped me that day. If it had been one night longer, or if my mother had not turned around, she would have been too late. It was just fate. I wouldn't say I liked it, but I cannot explain it any other way. I spent many days and weeks wishing that I had died. I tried to put on a good face for my family, but I was in so much agony and pain that it was all my brain could process. The fact that I was disfigured and ugly. That little dog took a huge chunk out of me with his gnashing teeth. I was lucky I was still breathing. It was not enough to be a human pincushion with all the stitches in me, like a rag doll ripped at the seams. I had to feel guilty when they put that dog to sleep for fear he would do it again. I felt like I was the monster everybody called me because when I looked in the mirror, that was all I could see staring back at me. I still remember my mother removing one bloody towel after another, my brother holding me in the back seat while my mother drove like a bat out of hell. I never really saw my mother, the nurse, in action. It was quite a sight to see. She was doing it all for me, her little girl. I remember driving to the emergency room, its sign lit up like a beacon on a warm August night. Minutes later, my mother came out with several medical personnel. They gently lifted my body from the seat, meeting the attendants halfway to get me out of the car and onto the gurney for my journey into the ER. That experience is burned into my memory and never to forgotten. I was dizzy from the loss of so much blood. I hadn't realized it was all for me. The doctor my mother summoned to her side was a longtime friend and associate. He was the best. Hermann the German, they called him, the best plastic surgeon on the island. My mother just said, "Don't worry, baby, you're in the best of hands." It took a while, more than a few years before the bandages would finally come off. But to me, as an 11-year-old girl, my little world was diminished. In my child's mind, my life was finished. In the years ahead, I would read the names I was called: Frankenstein, Mummy, and Scarface, to name a few. Kids could be so cruel. My self-esteem was non-existent. I wanted to scream. My mother kept telling me it would take time. I didn't want to go on. I had no friends. Nobody wanted to play with me. I was like glass. Everyone was afraid I would break. Nobody knew what to do. I want to say it all turned out okay, and eventually the scars healed. But I was angry all the time. Nothing could console me. Everyone tried, but all I did through those teen years was cry. It wasn't until I was 17 years old, and life was still mean, that I had to wait until my face grew to maturity before I could have further reconstructive surgery. In this finite life, there were many more moments of truth. There were many more losses. My grandmother and grandfather on my father's side died. I was there on a Friday. I took it hard. It sunk me to my core for sure. I didn't think I could take much more. Present, Chapter 12, The Prison Story. In the present, it's nobody's fault. I tried to tell myself it was just society's way of defending itself. Justice, I thought, meant it was just thrusting a person's existence into a small, consistent pattern of control. Just thinking like this left a large hole in my heart from the start of my sentence. I thought, what was everybody looking for from me? I asked God. I didn't see the purpose of uprooting my life as a mother. In so many ways, I had suffered enough strife. I thought I had gone through it all. The circumstances of my life, big and small. There were so many. To name a few, I feared it was all just a long journey for nothing. Why? I asked the Lord all the time. I cried out too because of the crimes of others. I am now here, not knowing what to do. I used to look at people who did wrong as deserving of their sentences. Now the proverb is, the shoe is on the other foot. Here I was, facing an extreme sentence. I began to shed a tear. Not just one, but within minutes, many started to fall. My eyes were open to a sort of revelation. The suffering of my past was rough, from a dog bite as a little girl to a major fall. There are so many different kinds of falls in life. Physical ones, financial ones, and emotional ones. I've experienced them all, but this one was one I didn't want to face, not for all the money in the world. This fall was one I could not recover from by just taking it easy and staying still. It was not my will. I had no choice. I was listening to my voice say these words, and I could not believe what I heard. I was making excuses for my actions, because if I had been given a chance to choose the actions, instead of reacting to them, for reasons I still can't explain, the sentence would have come at me like a freight train. Before my brain could process it, I stood as the judge brought down his gavel and pronounced my sentence. I began to unravel. The courtroom became to me a large, cavernous, vacuous chamber, and I was slowly sinking into it like a grave that had been dug especially for me. I couldn't wrap my head around any of it until I heard the cops walk up and put the cuffs on my wrists. The cuffs clicked as they fastened them around my belly. I was tied up tight, in a neat little box with cuffs tighter than my fists. They were so tight that they gouged a hole in my wrist. I asked them to loosen them because they were cutting into my skin. The marshals who frog-marched me out of the courthouse said to stop fidgeting and they would hurt less. I could see they were not listening to me. The journey to the first jail was long and uncomfortable. This was the county lockup under the jurisdiction of the U.S. Marshals. It was not a usual federal prison, but a small county jail. Let's face it, I did not know what to do. I was afraid and frustrated. I hated the way I was being treated. I felt defeated. In my head, there was a small voice like a whisper, saying to me, "I am the Lord, and I will never leave you." I started to calm down and breathe easy. I told myself I could do this, but it would be a long road, and I was just beginning. So today, as I sit here in my two-man cell 8 years later, I ask God, when will it be my turn? And he answers me, I am in control, so be patient, have faith, you're not alone. So I wait patiently for the day when God will open the doors for me, and I will finally be free. Past, Chapter 13, the visa plan. It was a major problem, a triple world away in a foreign country. We found ourselves in dire circumstances and did not know how we were going to manage our way out of the predicament that would cut short our trip and send us spiraling into a quagmire of anxiety. But I tried not to dwell on it because my spouse was beating himself up more than I ever could. I knew he felt like he had failed us. Being the man, oh boy, I had enough stress. I didn't need to add an overabundance of male testosterone to the mixture. It was already looking like a recipe for disaster. I just said to my husband, "Honey, let's go to the front desk downstairs of American Express Travel." I had never traveled to such an amazing destination before in my life. We started with a long plane trip from LaGuardia's International Airport in New York. It was going to be the trip of a lifetime for us. A young wife and her architect husband from the States. We worked so hard to create a niche for designing and building custom homes. It happened just as simply as that. The young couple and I belonged to an organization that dealt with architectural projects around the world. The project was to take shape in Japan. Tokyo, to be exact, was going to be a prototype of westernized housing development. We enjoyed visiting the models that we wanted to use to build homes in areas like Kyoto, Japan, with people from many different countries throughout Southeast Asia and the Pacific. It was so exotic and unique. We rode elephants and explored rubber tree farms. The most amazing thing was how they married the traditions of the East with the progress of the West. There was no buildable land, so the country had to build up. That is why this project, owned by a corporation that retained employees to work in Japan, wanted to bring Western architects to get the flavor of Western living in the East. Mostly, people who were regular and middle class lived in tenements. In the States, they called them urban city projects. The other problem they had, especially in Japan, was pollution worse than we had in California. So they wanted to create a system where the new housing development would have internal, man-made air seals, so the outside air did not filter into the interior of the homes. The tenements in Japan, also known as tatami, looked like large boxes flipped over on their sides and stacked on top of each other. They were as far and as deep as the sea. People rode bicycles in large cities like Tokyo. Cars were a rarity in the city. The only place cars could go was in the countryside, but people in the country could not afford cars. The next useful mode of transportation was called the bullet train. It's a very fast way to get around. The mass transit in these cities was as clean as a whistle. It was the one thing I noticed throughout the Orient. The train was so fast at times that it just flew by in a big blur. I wanted to see Mount Fuji. It was eye-opening, this white-crusted whole top. We were there during the monsoon season. We wore bamboo with matching hoods to keep dry and safe from nature's elements. Bamboo is a material used for all purposes in this area of the world. I'd been building in the States now for a while, but I never saw bamboo used as scaffolding to help carry workmen up to huge skyscrapers. But it was all over Japan. Wherever you saw construction in the city, it was unusual and very pretty. They stood there like strong, sturdy structures, their pillars holding up what was now helping the ancient Orient come into the present. I loved the elegant marriage of ancient customs and present-day remixes. I watched a young family try to fix their carriage while working in the fields' rice paddies. These were similar to our farms in the United States. We were enjoying a kind of gentleness, like a whisper. The country was very conservative and very proud of its heritage. On the TV in the hotel where we were staying, we wanted to crawl under the nearest table with the large orchid vase in the center of the lobby. We felt the sadness even though that loss was 50 years ago. The people watched in horror, ancient and timeless, the bomb that ended World War II. They were the children and grandchildren of those elders who fought and lost not only their battle but the peace. Their ancient world spun out of control. But for that scene, nothing else even resembled the carnage and loss. There was a concept known as black rain. I thought it was a movie. I never knew what it meant until I traveled a world away from my home. All the things I learned are not as they seem. You must experience life in other places and cultures to understand the look on people's faces in their own country. We were guests, and they welcomed us too. Now, as real as it was still being felt, the old ancient world of Japan was not interested in persisting in days long gone. It was more than 2 solid weeks into our Orient trip when we discovered that we had no money left. We were purchasing a gift for my mother and sister, a beautiful hand-embroidered kimono, when we heard the salesperson say, "Your card has been declined." I thought to myself, okay, it happens. But I was a world away. This was not a place where you asked to see the manager or called someone to get in touch with customer service. But that is exactly what I had to do. I knew no more than 3 phrases in Japanese. How are you? Greetings. And how much is that? Now that last one seems to be universal in English, no matter what language or what part of the world you are in. Every shopkeeper knows that phrase and how to break the language barrier when it comes to the bottom line. I knew I had not spent too much money on the American Express card with no limit. So what was happening here? It would be hours before I got in touch with someone at American Express because of the time difference. But it seemed that didn't make any difference because it had nothing to do with my mistake but theirs. They had double-checked my card on our trip. They said nothing could be done about it. I did what I always do in a difficult business transaction. "I am more than welcome home," they said to me. Googling in a foreign country without any help, I went to the American Express office. They had an office in every country for their members so that they would not feel alone when they were far from home. In my imagination, I played out their little helpful advertisements that you saw plastered on American television. I was distraught and had brought only enough clothes to get me through 2 weeks. We had 1 more week and 1 more country before we got on a flight home to the States. Our return plane was going out of Hong Kong Harbor. It was not the tickets that we needed. but a way of getting from one country to another. We wandered around the streets of Tokyo and thought, what are we going to do? I must have been speaking loud enough. I was screaming at the top of my lungs while we walked the streets. It was late, and no one was around. We stumbled upon an outdoor barbecue right in the middle of the street. It was then that we realized where everyone was at 2 a.m. The money was scarce. We only had $500,000 in American Express travelers' checks. Everything in the 90s in Japan was overinflated. I started home for a couple of more than 400,000 US dollars. I wanted to holler. I was crying and trying to be brave, and my husband at the time was trying to put on a brave face in this faraway foreign place. It was a wonderful experience, and shrimp was one of my favorite foods. They were barbecued with a special sweet and sour sauce, but they were huge. I had never seen shrimp this big in my life. They sat on my plate on the table with their bulging black eyes staring up at me. It was eerie to see my food looking at me. I could hardly talk. These were not regular shrimp. They were called prawns. These looked like genetically engineered shrimp, but they were natural and distinct from the environment. They were delicious once I got past the part about them looking at me. I enjoyed the hot sake with the barbecue prawns and the special Japanese vegetables. They were wrapped in tempura and dropped into large amounts of hot sesame oil. I enjoyed the evening and the pedicure back at the hotel, but because of the events today, I could not sleep. I spent the night watching my husband sleep while going through my wallet and worrying about what we were going to do next and how we were going to finish our trip. I prayed hard and thought maybe I should call my family, but they could not have helped, or so I suspected. But I was not going to ask, even if they could. So I rejected the idea, and in my fear, the answer became clear. I needed to have an alternative way of making restitution. That was when the solution came to me. I pulled out my Visa card thinking I had left it at home. I was sure I had left it at home, but it was there in my purse. I wasn't sure it would work, but I had to try. Even though I was going to feel like a jerk, it was better than being stranded in a foreign country and branded a stupid American. This was definitely how I was feeling, but I had to try. I swallowed my pride. I knew inside that I had to do this. So while we slept, I finished being upset. While he slept, I finished being upset a little more and swore to myself that this would never happen to me again. So before I picked up the phone to go to the States, I spent a good 10 minutes praying and saying, God, please give me some help here. We are all alone, on our own, far away from our home and family. Please help me. I picked up the receiver, dialed all the appropriate ones and zeros needed to make an international call, and waited more than a dozen rings until someone picked up on the other end. Visa customer service, how can I help you? I took a deep breath and said, yes, I need help. I began to explain my situation to the customer service person, saying, I don't know if you can help me, but I need an extension on my card. Then I held my breath, waiting for the answer. At the same time, I was saying every prayer my mom and grandma had taught me since the time they brought me to church. I don't know, but I kept on praying to find me. The woman said to me, okay, we can give you a $1,000 increase on your credit because you are in a foreign country with $500,000 in Visa traveler's checks. I said, thank you so much, and you have been an angel. And she said, oh, that's wonderful. You believe? I said, I do. She gave me a special PIN to access the emergency funds, and I told her, you have been a lifesaver. After I hung up the receiver, I got on my knees and said, God, you always come through no matter what. Because of who you are, I give you glory. I give you praise. I fell asleep with those words of thanks and praise on my lips. My husband woke many hours later, around 9 a.m., Tokyo time, and tried to wake me up. "Ah, come on, we have to go to the American Express office." I mumbled, "Wake me up in an hour, okay?" Present. Chapter 14. The Mother's Day, or 2. 1 John 4:18. Such love has no fear, because perfect love expels all fear. Okay, there's a second part to the story of my mother's passing. You would have thought after my mom's passing and me being given a random UA, on the same night, they would have shown a little compassion. But that was the day my life went a complete 180 degrees in the wrong direction. Not only had I not slept, eaten, or had any water for days while my mother was in a hospital on a respirator because her lungs were full of fluid from pneumonia, but I prayed, fasted, and practically begged God to save her. No, I could not lose her. Finally, the day before, I spoke to her on the phone during one of my daily phone calls. I was happy to hear she was no longer on the ventilator. She was breathing on her own. She had rallied. That was a good sign. I felt good and relieved. I could finally breathe. I felt like my chest was so tight for the last few days. The pain was unbearable. Thanking God was all I could do. So I decided to go to the source. We had our weekly service that Thursday night, as always. I was scheduled to sing the solo, and decided to honor my mother by singing one of her favorite songs, Gentle Woman. After the things that happened that night to me and all the female inmates in that chapel, there was no explanation, at least not one I could or would accept. I thought maybe it was a freak thing, a change in the weather patterns. Patterns. After all, it was August in Florida. We were in hurricane season, so it was not unusual to have dry weather, dry lightning strikes. I don't remember anything like that night happening ever before. There was never anything like that. I can recall that since I moved to Florida with my family more than 10 years prior, it was right after the events of September 11th. I was a New York transplant and wanted to start my life over and get a new start after the divorce and the cancer, surgeries that I had to endure. I had one course of chemo to make sure that they got all of it. I had so much to be thankful for. But it never failed. It always happened every time. I thought things were finally looking good for me. It was always the time I decided to let my guard down and stop to smell the roses. But every time I did that, things always came undone for me. So now was not going to be any different. So yes, that night was very muggy. The air was thick as molasses. There was not a breeze in sight. There was less of a gust of wind that would blow the doors of the chapel off their hinges. But that's exactly what happened. Stranger things have happened to me, like a hole forming over my home, but not on anyone else's home, just mine. This also took place in August. Like almost every event I could never explain taking place in August, this was going to be no exception. So that night, my life began to spiral down all around me. I just did not know it yet. It was like the gut punch I received. During the time of September 11th, everything that ever happened to me was intertwined for some reason, leading up to this moment. 1 minute my life was going along smoothly, and then the next was a tidal wave as big as a tsunami. The next day took the shape of a complete knockdown. It caught me totally off guard, not just a right to the jaw or a punch to the gut, but a 1-2 punch, a knockdown complete with 15 rounds of uppercuts and jabs straight to my heart. It was just a day like any other. I got up to start my day, as I always do. I did my daily 30-minute prayers, got my stuff together, and got in line for the shower. We have not been allowed more than 10-minute showers since then. There were more than 100 women in my unit, and there were only 20 shower stalls. But I lost myself when I got in the shower. It was a time when I liked to believe I was not where I was. I liked nice hot showers lasting a little more than 15 minutes. I knew there were more. Women are outside waiting for their turn to take their shower. I didn't care about standing there, lathering up, or feeling the hot pelting. The spray of the water hit my skin, but I tuned it all out. I had to keep my sanity. It was one of the only places we could get any privacy. After my relaxing shower and my moment of solace, I dressed for the day ahead. I usually check my email before I head to my job in the kitchen, where I was the head of the floor crew at the federal women's camp where I was housed. So I sat down to log on to the computer and keyed in my ID. There it was, the proverbial bird of paradise, ready to shit on my head. It was there to destroy, not kill me, because as my eyes scanned the email from my mother's friend, locking on one phrase, "I'm sorry. Your mother passed last night at 7 p.m. We are going to come to visit tomorrow. I will give you more information then. We will see you tomorrow. Until then, stay strong and in God's eternal embrace." I must have gotten emotional because it was that moment I fell out of that cheap government plastic chair. I just sat there with a heap, a blob, and a raw bundle of nerves, and in tears, I sat on that concrete floor, unable to muster enough energy to rise from the floor. The woman next to me stopped doing what she was focused on and reached out to console me. She couldn't help but take a peek, which was not intentional on her part. It was more like a person seeing a wreck on the side of the road. They would stop and watch. Was human nature. The email was open on the screen, so it was inevitable that she would read it and know of my loss. Now I had many other reasons to cry before this, but this was the time the tears would gush out like uncontrollable sounding. Sobs. It sounded as though someone had torn my flesh off my body. I was crying hysterically. It was not unusual, and likely a normal response to the loss of a parent. The loss of a mother is shown statistically to be akin to a catastrophic event. The woman, I barely knew of her. That's how things were in prison. You had to keep a low profile. I had seen her around the cube from time to time. We all kept to ourselves. The adage is to keep your head down and take your time. Quietly. We never once talked to each other or even introduced ourselves formally, except to say hello and goodbye, each other in the unit. She shut down my computer and took me back to my open cube, holding me, while I cried in my eyes. I mourn the loss of the most critical person in my life, my support, my rock, my mother. She carried my limp body into my open cube. She sat with me. We sat down on my bunkie's bunk. This is something you did not do in prison. A person's bunk was their prized possession. We didn't have to. Much in the way of property, and factually the bunk beds belonged to the federal government agency of prisons. But the inmates were not listening to that. These were ours, and no one should disrespect another inmate sitting on their bunk. I hesitated to sit on my bunkie's bunk, and the woman gently said, "Don't worry about it." I told her through my sobs that I was going to be late for work. Another inmate passed by at that moment, and she yelled out, "Come here," and asked me where I worked. I told her food service detail, and I am the only one who does the floors. She said, "Did you get that?" The other woman inmate said, "Yes, I'll take care of it," as she puts her hand on my shoulder to show support for me. I was afraid of saying, "I'll get a shot." It was the one thing I never wanted to get a shot at. Be careful what you wish for, because you just might get it. Not only did I get a shot, but I got one of the most detrimental shots an inmate can receive. Those two women didn't know me from Adam, and they could have gotten in trouble helping me. But if I remember anything about going to prison will show how genuinely sisterly the women were to each other. I know there were some, as if you were back in high school and dealing with the mean girls squad. They were few and far between, and believed it or not, it was the white women who were just as snooty in prison as out. but the Spanish ladies were the most loving, and the black women were second in line for caring for each other. As the Lord said in the Bible, "Love others as you love yourself." Love others, you love yourself. That woman held me and rocked me, like a baby secure in her arms. "It's okay, baby, you cry." I wanted to shout to the heavens. That was another. The thing I will remember from prison is that you could not express your feelings of rage just to let them out of your body. It would land you in a psyche, but the track was the place where we could scream, cry, and run until we dropped. But only during the time the FBOP said we could. Another thing was that we had no independence to do what a human being had the right to do. Which was to grieve. I was taken to a place I had never been before. And why did this happen? There was a simple and horrific answer. My mother died, and I was not allowed to be hurt. I needed to go to work. It was how I coped with having to keep busy. When my father died, I was working and nearly did not get to the hospital in time to say goodbye, but I was in the elevator, minutes away from his bedside, watching the numbers light up as the floors passed, frustrated that the elevator was not traveling fast enough. I was waiting and praying when my cell went off in my pocket. I took a look, while still keeping my eye on the doors of the elevator. I was almost there, and the doors would open. I would jump out and be there. But when I answered the call, it was my barely older brother. We were Irish twins, just 18 months different in age. I guess in those days my dad had a great deal of spirit and energy. I picked up and heard my brother's voice on the other end. "Where are you?" "I am in the elevator to the hospital, almost there." All I heard my brother say was, "He's gone. Daddy's gone." I started to cry. Just as the elevator doors opened, I was so anxious to get to A moment ago. Now it makes no difference. He was gone, and I missed it. But I still went and spoke to him. I took the scapula, the relic. We were Catholic, and it's a significant symbol of faith for our religion. It was cupped in his hand, and it made me feel like he was still alive and with me. I carried that scapula. It was only a green piece of felt from an outsider's point of view, and that is how a CO treated it one day when I was leaving Mainline. That was what we called lunchtime in prison. They were searching for us as we left, so we were not taking any food with us. We were criminals if we wanted to eat an orange back in our cells or rooms. The inmates called them rooms, and the CO was another way to show power over us called cells. It's that superior to inferior thing. They have come from a military framework. We were all dressed alike, and no one was allowed to be distinct from another. But as long as I carried that small piece of green felt, I was distinct and protected by angels and saints, as my grandmother taught me. The prison was a very cold, barren place. We all had to have our special way of getting through the darkest days. My way was through my belief in God's purpose. For me, I am still dealing with that, but it's getting better. Or it was before this pandemic snafu that has kept us in our units, masks, and segregated, as if we were in a maximum facility, as if we were murderers and heinously violent instead of non-violent, and first-time federal offenders like myself. There are so many other stories I could relay, but this book would be massive if I told them all. So I have just selected the ones that made the biggest impression, the ones that could only be explained by divine intervention and prayers. Well, getting back to this story, I could not attend my mom's funeral or memorial service, saying to the captain of the federal women's camp, "Please, can you try and get me a furlough?" They said they would, and that was the last I heard of my request. It was about 6 p.m., and my name was called over the camp sound system. My name rang out over and over. I guess even though my ears physically should have heard it, it didn't register in my head. That has happened to me numerous times in the past. I can just tune things out as if I were in another dimension. I was in another dimension. My mother had just died, or I wish I had been in another dimension because I wanted to shut down everything and everybody out. My mother just died. I wanted to die right along with her. I was not able to grieve, and I had no one who could even understand what I was dealing with. This was all the stuff that was swirling around in my head, making me dizzy. I wanted to lie down and just go to sleep. All of a sudden, the energy just left my body. Income. How I made my way back to my cubicle through my haze. My bunkie said, "Where have you been?" "They called you to the lieutenant's office." I answered her back, saying, "I don't know, just lost in my head." I began to change without even thinking about it. From my grays to my dress uniform, I made my way to see what the lieutenant wanted to talk to me about. A part of me was hoping and praying that it was about my request for a furlough from my mother's memorial service. I arrived after a brisk walk in the hot August evening. I saw more than 10 women stretched across the large visitors' room. They were not only sitting in the chairs and standing against the wall, but they were also the women who were in that chapel the night before. They witnessed that scene where the chapel doors blew open. One of them said to me, "Didn't I hear that your mom passed away today?" I said, "Yes." She said, "I'm sorry for your loss." They all in unison said they did the same thing and gave me their support. I appreciated their support, and I might have sounded a little short. I thought this was about my furlough, but I asked them if they had any information. They said they didn't know what I was referring to. I later came to find out what this was all about. A random U.S. That day was bad enough for me. Now the evening would lead to catastrophe. I should have been allowed to waive this invasion of my privacy during this time of loss. But I never made my own decisions, and to disobey would cost me dearly. It just so happened that I lost big that night too, so I blew the test because I was not able to comply with the superior who was conducting the UA. After all, I was severely ill. I was dehydrated from my terrible grief. I said to the lieutenant on duty, saying over and over, "This is a mistake, my mother. I just died." And I started to cry. They made no mistakes here. We just need you to pee in a cup, so don't fear saying, "Just get it over with, and you're out of here." Is that clear? The tears began, and I said, "I can't," I said in my heart. The lieutenant said, "Why?" I said, "Because I am severely dehydrated. Haven't you been listening to me? My mother is dead." Well, they didn't care. There was no chaplain to see me or how I was, which was customary. There were no condolences. It was offensive. After 2 long, grueling hours, the powers that be in the FBOP told me, "Do it or go to the SHU." I became hysterical. I told them I couldn't. I don't know what to do. They said, "You give us no choice." I could barely find my voice with all the crying. My eyes were turning red and puffy, and my throat was getting rough and sounding husky with all the crying, and carrying on what I had already been doing for more than 8 hours. But no one was my friend in this situation. And the end. I wound up being punished for losing my mom. I never got to grieve with my family. I wasn't there when they came to see me the next day for visitation. God tries to ease the hurt by sending his support. It was at that time that the angels were there, with me again, this time in the form of a missionary's wife in the local county prison they had sent me to. It was theirs, a version of the SHU, Special Housing Unit. In the camp, we did not have a SHU, so it was the nearest local county jail. I would have to do that. She comforted me the first few days I was there. If not for her, I might not have made it. That's not all. God does it for those who love the Lord. He gives you the ability to get out of yourself by coming to the aid of someone else. Her name was Alice. She was very callous, believed that she was a piece of garbage and treated herself that way of putting that poison in her system. I tried to stay away from everyone and keep a low profile, but that's not God's way. That day, God gave me someone to help and pray for who was worse off than me. That's how he eases pain, by making someone else the focus of your brain. So Alice was on her last strike, sort of speaking, and her feeling of helplessness had peaked. She tried to kill herself, and instead landed in a bed in the cell next to me. I asked her if she wanted to attend Bible study with me the next day, and well, what could she say? I guess she could have said no, but I believe she needed to go. So I urged her to come with me and see. If she did not feel comfortable, she had the power to leave. It was that one day. We all, collectively as a group, prayed. The missionary's wife took Alice in her arms and laid hands on her. She told me that after that she felt very different, like the demons were no longer tormenting her. I did not know what to say when she reached over, hugging me and saying, "You saved my life." I just shrugged and said, "It was not me. I am not good right now. Anybody." We went to sleep that night, not Alice. She was wide awake. Alice read all of the Gospel of John that very night. She went into the morning and prayed for everyone she knew, even those she did not like, but that was the idea of praying for your enemies, as well as your friends. Jesus said, "It's hardest to pray for your enemies, but for your friends, not so much." Or something to that effect. So after the day, she couldn't wait to tell me how good she felt. She had a clean heart, she said, to start. I just nodded my head up and down while listening to her tell her testimonial. I was going through it, but God would not let me wallow in my pain. My mom, who was a nurse, taught me to help others who were in pain too. There were weeks of study, meditation, and the help of others while I was there in that little Florida county jail. I will admit that the missionary's wife and a nurse made me feel like God and my mother were there, comforting me too. I knew that was not true in the real world, but in the spirit, I knew it was more than true. It was possible. The second support God gave me was what they said. It was my lot in life. In my life, it was always that way. God and his Son, the only ones, along with the Holy Spirit, were always giving me the trials of fire. I don't know what inspired God to always select me. I used to think, wasn't there someone else? No, I guess not. Here I am. Lord, is it me, Lord? I have heard you call. I will go if you lead me. Exactly what God was doing, leading me. I was never anxious. I may not know where I was going, but I knew who was leading. It was all I needed to trust in someone who was just there and knew me from before I was born. The journey was long. It was taking me to places I didn't know about or why, but I knew God was in control, so I decided to roll with it. Oh, don't get me wrong. I still made the effort to fight, since God made me never give in or give up. There was a woman who taught me cosmetology. I won't give her name, but I will. I want to tell her I appreciate everything she did for me. If not for her, I would have been lost and felt rejected because I was the odd duck in the class. I had no understanding of the science of hair care, but I was there, and I was making it count. This CEO/trainer/cosmetologist was showing me she believed in my skills. I had free will, and I was being bullied, so I wanted to go up and quit class several times. She would not let me. I just wanted to go and not look back. But I stuck with it, even with all the naysayers, some of those who were taught more poorly, as in 1 Thessalonians 1-6, God troubles those who trouble me. Well, they dropped out, or they were kicked out. But I am not only finished, I graduated and helped another graduate who was not very book smart. I would have helped the others who bullied me, even though they were good at the practical. They were unable to pass the exams and therefore were failing. They had the talent, but they did not have the drive and persistence like I did, and God was guiding me to His purpose. I am still waiting to take the license exam, but if I could get this far, then I would make it all the way. I spent my life thinking, oh, it's my lot in life, because everyone at one time or another tried to break me. As long as God was sending His angels to watch over me and bless me, I could get through. Like in the Philippines, 4:13, St. Paul said, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. God keeps us all on our toes because He has a greater purpose for us. Even though I didn't belong, there was a passion inside me telling me I had to do this. I wanted to just get depressed and crawl into a hole, but I needed to be consoled. She was a wonderful lady, a lot like me when I was growing up. She was not a Nubian princess and was most likely kicked around by society too. She was a giver, a person who puts her own needs on the shelf. I was a fish out of water, and life had thrown me into the deep end. I did not drown, but I swam better and better over and over again. All the women in class taunted me to quit, but my instructor, small and petite with light brown hair and a healthy case of inadequacy, blessed me by being there for me. I wanted to quit, but you see, she made me stay until graduation day. I even wrote a poem for the class motto. I saw her smile widen when she handed me my diploma. She was so proud of me deep inside, and it showed in her pride in me. You see, the women in my class were very mean-spirited, especially to me, an outsider. One of the meanest ones came when I woke up from my accident, where I had lost all my teeth and started making gestures and pointing to my face. I said I didn't want her to touch me because her mouth was gross and it would probably contaminate me. When my teacher heard about this, she called out every girl in class and had a serious conversation with everyone. But she sent me to retrieve something that was not. In earshot of listening to her call out all these women for their selfishness that day, the 1,000-pound steel door of the unit, while I was on my way to class one day, came back and smashed into the side of my head. If it had been a frontal slam to the head, knocking all my upper teeth out of my mouth, still to this day, after all this time and 3 years later, nothing has been done for me in the way of treatment to repair any of my damage. I continue to live with abscesses and sores and am open. Exposed nerves during a pandemic would not be here to be written about in this book, about miracles and angels. Oh, one more thing I forgot to mention. Most normal functioning people have 4 chambers in their hearts. My mother lived for 20 years before her passing, with only 1 chamber functioning in her heart. She has lived for more than a dozen years. Before her passing in August 2016, she had a defibrillator surgically put into her heart so that when it was shut off, the device would automatically start back up again. Better than the engine on a car. People would say it was the miracle of modern medicine. I say it was God not wanting to bring her home yet. He believed that, as a nurse, she had a greater purpose here until she was finished with her purpose. I guess that was something that my mother and I had in common, not just purpose, but miracles. I had a chance to leave this FC just once, and I was unwilling to leave because I had made a promise to another. Inmate helped her with her case, and it was a promise I couldn't break because she had no one else. But I will talk about this in chapter 18. I was not planning on going further with this book, but I remembered this story was important and unexplainable in any other way, but through divine intervention. That meant that God and His angels interceded for them. It was good of someone else for me to be there for them. So in this story, it was God who was the power that be, not the FBOP. But anyone who is a believer knows that the Almighty God is in control. John 14:1. Let not your heart be troubled. Believe in God, and also believe in His Son, Jesus Christ. These are the ultimate sources of every one of our resources. So no one can hurt us, either body or soul, because God is in control, the ultimate source. Praise Him and give Him all the glory. So God promised to deliver it to me, after He does as He says in Jeremiah 29. I will seek Him and find Him, and He will be found by me. He will be our God, and we will be His people forever and ever. Past, Chapter 15, The Rosary. Well, the years were flying by, and I was trying to keep things as regular as possible for my little boy and me. They always showed up, the angels, when I was as low as a person could go. I was not doing well. I felt newly separated. If my life had been wasted on a marriage that castrated me, before the abuse, it was the way he was emotionally, berated me. I tried to be a good wife, mother, and business partner. After my surgery, I was no longer whole. The surgery, chemo, and the world had taken pieces of me. My resources were drying up and depleting me. The legal separation from my husband of 12 years, the legal fees to the attorney, and holding on to the house were draining me. But I was not a person who gave in or gave up. I always had to be in control. So it took a toll on me. I was trying so hard to right the wrongs of this man who married me. Before I was fundamentally married, I had no fundamental issues in my life. Everything I worked on was accomplished in retrospect. I never believed in myself and thought I had failed at everything. But I look back at my life, and I was not the failure in my life, but the survivor. I was the thriver. Everything I did, I tried to make the next thing better, no matter what. People tried to tell me that I amounted to nothing and was worthless. I had been through so much in my life that it always felt like someone was making that last cut, with the proverbial knife going deeper and deeper as time went on. I worked while accomplishing my goals. The lack of self-esteem took a toll on me. It began with, "Can't you be more like your beautiful blonde-haired, famously athletically inclined, famous Sunder? You can't have a house like your sister." All my life, I have been competing to measure up, but I didn't need to measure up or compete with anyone. It was me. It was just fine for God, and He wanted it to be just fine for me. He blessed me with every chance He got to show me I was worth something. But it was fear that wore on my very own after going through being savagely ravaged by a dog at age 11. I was very self-conscious of my looks. You would be too. I always lamented, "God, it's not fair. My face has tattoos and scars. How can I choose between public and private? They will all make fun of me." So I compensated by making things. I had my assets instead, my brain, imagination, and drive to succeed, no matter the obstacles. Life is put in my way. God turned them around, and they became my miracles. They were my stepping stones instead of me, stumbling blocks throughout my life. I learned how to make lemonade from lemons. I took the sours of life and gave them the sweet taste of blessings from my ultimate source, God Almighty. He was right. We would suffer a little, but God would bring us through. It took years of wiping away the jeers from what people used to say. You'll never amount to anything, and you are hideous to look at. You are not as thoughtful as your sister, as bright as your oldest brother, or as cute as your younger brother. So I was the proverbial middle child. The most I had going for me was my sheer drive and tenacity. I was like a dog with a proverbial bone. My actions were obsessive but done with passion. and I gave my all to others first. Everyone made me believe I had no right to receive or achieve because I was just not worthy. That day, that dog not only tore my face but also erased my confidence. So more than 20 years later, my life was falling apart. Apart again. But I like to think it was coming together. I weathered the storms of my near death, the loss of my grandmother, and nearly losing my baby. There were the surgeries, and now there is the tragedy of being a divorcee. My sister told me I had failed at matrimony. So now not only was I a failure at being in a long-term relationship, I had to answer those who had no idea what I was going through. So I just wanted to find a place, pull my car over, and cry boo-hoo-hoo. After I cried my eyes out, I started to shout aloud, "God, why?" Pulling from the small space in the corner, I kept a small box. I drew a tissue, blew my nose, looked in the visor mirror, and composed myself. I had a new drive for myself and my baby boy. I had to survive, not thrive, and make it through. Now that I had my resolve, I still didn't know what to do or where to go. I put the car in gear and steered onto the road. I drove. For a few minutes there was my answer. I thought, why not give it a shot? I saw the cross in the community church and veered across to the exit leading to the community church, with the large cross gleaming in the sunlight. I pulled my car into the church parking lot. It was a weekday, and there were not that many cars parked there, but I knew they were there for the same thing as me. Prayer. To talk to our land, we needed a savior. I waited and paused. Before deciding whether to stay, choose a way. I guess I chose to stay by turning off the ignition. I finally had a direction and a mission. I unbuckled my seatbelt. I felt a little embarrassed by the thoughts that were swirling in my head. I started to exit the car, closing the driver's door and taking a deep breath, inhaling and exhaling with a thrust, before I reached my arm back to unbuckle the infant car seat, to remove him from the car. I smiled at my baby boy as I lifted him into the stroller and said, "Come on, baby boy. Let's go inside and see the one who gave you to me." He made the sounds. A baby makes sense when they are loved and happy. I wanted to keep that happy little cherub happy, saying, "Okay, little one, let's go talk to God, you and me." So, I rolled the stroller with my son inside toward the church ramp, reached in and straightened his little sunglasses to keep the sun from disturbing his impending nap. I stopped at the statue of Mary, the Blessed Mother, while I prayed to Our Lady to come to my aid. "O Homothermus had a baby boy, so I ask you to protect me now that I am a single mother raising mine." I was finishing my silent plea to Our Lady when a woman came up to me. I asked Our Lady to help me, and she said, "I couldn't help overhearing. I didn't mean to disturb your prayer, but I found this message as she handed it to me, saying, 'It's for you to buy diapers for your son.' I told her I didn't drop a $20 bill. She said, 'No, it's for you. God told me to give it to you.' At first I was very concerned. I kind of started walking away because I was nervous about my son's welfare. I tried to tell her, 'I don't care. I didn't drop any money there.' She said, insisting, 'Honey, the money is for you. And I have something else too.' The woman opened her hands. One had a pink rosary, and the other was a blue one. She said, 'This blue one is for your son, and the pink one will be for your daughter.' I told her, 'My doctor told me I can't have any more babies and I am getting divorced.' I was very perturbed. The woman was disturbed. If not, she was disturbing me. She proceeded to tell me how she just came back from Italy. I told her I had been there recently. While I was still happily married, things were going well for me. She said, 'You just thought they were, and he was too. Weak for you. Just be patient and have faith that God will reveal it all in His own time to you. Well, it was years later. I did get through, and my little boy was given a little pink bundle, a girl, and a little sister. Yet another miracle. She came along 5 years after my son turned 6. The lady I met that day at the church was what my grandmother used to call a visitation, an angel on earth. It was genuine, and after that day I truly believed it too. I was told, by many I met along the way through my life, that I was highly favored and forever blessed. My story was still in full swing. Now I was a single mother with 2 children, 1 boy and 1 girl in my world. My future was bright. Maybe that's why I believed that when everything was going well, God gave me yet another test of great humility to teach me to wait more, patiently. This was God's way of showing me that I was always supposed to be dependent on Him. He doesn't want us to be independent from His embrace. That's why He says in 2 Corinthians 12:9, "My grace is all you need. My power works best in weakness, so that the power of Christ can work through me. That's why I take pleasure in my weaknesses and in the insults, hardships, persecutions, and troubles I have suffered in Christ's name. For when I am weak, I am strong." That is because God sent His angels to me whenever I was at my weakest, to show me that He was always there for me. I was never alone, as long as I was willing to suffer a little and give myself to others. God would pull me through, as written in Psalms, 34 minutes and 19 seconds. My past trials set the stage for the present. The present will help set the stage for what will be in my future. As long as my purposes align with God's will, James 4:3, I will always wake up to the light in all my times past, present, and future. The best is yet to be. These stories are just the tip. Continue to read on to the following chapters for more unexplained miracles in my life. She was a horrible mother, and she allowed her son to get into trouble. She is a mastermind and a manipulator. The attorney didn't get a chance to stand and count the destructive statements the U.S. attorney made to the 12-person jury. It was not me who cared about that day. I was the last person on my list. God knew I would be okay if I could make sure. My family was okay. I could get through anything as long as my family was spared the worst. So, that day started like the previous 3 days were circus days. We sat in the courtroom of my trial listening to witnesses, and I was cursing my lawyer under my breath because he was greener than the grass outside the courthouse lawn. But that story alone would fill a book. I will write it one day. I will write it when I am finally free to tell the whole railroaded episode. Now is the time for stories of hope and miracles. I needed to see God. The judge broke for lunch, and the jury was to deliberate during the lunch hour since both sides had rested their case. After the deliberation, I guess they could not spare time to eat lunch before they made the final lynching. They would deliberate my fate. I could not wait. I left the courtroom in search of my security blanket. Not for me, but for my family. You see, I just got word during my trial of you that you are in LY, NY, which I have been trying to sell for. More than 4 years had just passed. There was not a nibble for 4 years, but I prayed for a solution, and God put it in my heart. If I changed realtors, I would sell it. It was a long shot, but I wanted to obey God's voice and move forward without fear, unlike the Israelites in the Old Testament, who challenged God's ways every chance they got and were stubborn, and every word out of their mouth was a complaint and a lament. Like in Exodus 14:13, God said to move forward, and He would lead us to victory. So I moved forward, even though I had a bunch of naysayers in my life. I did what God wanted of me, and the moment the jury broke to deliberate, I was out the door looking frantically for a notary. Without a notary, we could not sign and close on the property to get the money my family needed to get through. Had no idea what my fate was, but I knew God knew, so I followed his lead. I needed to get this done before the lunch hour was over. So, while I was out on the signature bond, I put the new realtor on. There were some nibbles, but none came to fruition until that moment. It was going to be a race against time. My probation officer told me not to worry. The money I would get was 2 years probation. You will not go to prison. But I guess listening to God was the right thing to do. I had only a few minutes left of freedom. I was getting scared, and now my daughter's father was starting to talk negatively, as in Proverbs, "What you have in your heart will manifest from your lips." I secretly thought, maybe you could go to work, but there was no work. We were so far in debt that we had no water or electricity. Our home was a desolate place in a gated, lively community. I didn't want this for my daughter. We needed a significant infusion of cash. The sale of the house would take care of this. This was a property I received, divorce of my son's father. So, I remember praying on the second day of my trial, saying, "When 2 or more pray in the same way, accord Jesus is in the midst of them." So I prayed no more for the acquittal than for the help my family needed. I prayed for others because my grandmother told me that is what you do, and God takes care of you while you bless others. So I kept praying that same prayer over and over. I remember that prayer is a powerful tool. I was also thinking that angels would come in some form again to help me. I went to sleep that night with that prayer on my lips and in my heart. Another day passed, day 3 of the trial. Coming out of the courthouse, I had no idea that my days were now being numbered in hours. I figured that even if I was convicted, I would probably be out until after my appeal was over. Since I was told by my probation officer I was a problem, the free defendant, and I had no criminal history. None. But only God knew the events that were to take place in those next 36 hours. I could barely eat dinner, and we sat at the restaurant lingering over my 4th glass of wine. I thought I may not have had the ability to do this for a very long time. So I wanted to savor every moment I spent as a free person. I was getting frantic. My daughter's father was with me and tried to calm me down. You see, nothing could console me. I felt the hours were ticking away. My freedom is clicking away. I was not okay. All I wanted was to find a church nearby and light a candle. This was how I chose to handle the anxiety I was feeling. I wanted to light a candle for my children and my home, my mother and what was to come. So again, I went to bed with that prayer swirling around in my head. I was moving. Lips thank God for everything he has done for me. In 1 Thesis 5:16-23, we are told that all God wants from us is to be thankful for all things, not just some things. So I thanked him for the beautiful life he has blessed me with through travel and my children. I told him I had no regrets. I thanked him for the 3rd child I now had. I adopted my daughter's best friend. Her parents had no use for her. She was going down the wrong path. She was already a teenage mother at age 17. I am so proud of. She was thankful that God allowed me to take care of her. She calls me Mom. I did not say she had to. She wanted to. So that was okay with me. Another day down, and that night I did sleep well. I knew I was embraced in God's protection. It was enough to erase all my fears. I counted on God's protection like I had so many times in my life. God never let me down, and I knew he wouldn't start now. The morning came on the 4th day. I wanted to dress nicely for court. Even the judge made notice of it. Day and more than 6 months later, on the day of my sentencing, again, we went through the motions that last day. But because my attorney was so bad and brought no case, I had been given no choice but to testify. That was a mistake. I should have known better, being a 20-plus-year experienced paralegal. But I wanted to say. It would be my last chance to call. The prosecutor was corrupt, and he was. The whole thing was a 3-ring circus, complete with the clown, my attorney, the ringmaster, the judge, and the person who was to put her head in the lion's mouth were me. The whole thing was like a Greek tragedy. Again, we broke for lunch, and my lawyer was supposed to have time to prepare a summation. That's a statement at the end made by the attorney from each side, to sum up their cases and the facts. He thought he had at least. Another day, no way. That judge wanted to get this over. I say that and think, how do you put together a summation? Before all the facts are in or the case is over, I'll tell you how an experienced attorney would have fought for me. He knows to prepare something just in case something like this happens. But this one had no experience and flew by the seat of his pants, as they say. It was painful to watch, much less listen, to hear the prosecutor vilify me as a lousy mother over and over. What kind of mother allows her son to be caught in something like this? He said, with a confident sneer back toward me. The trial part was concluded, and the prosecutor did his job. The facts, by the time he was finished, were so polluted and convoluted that it was like peeling an onion, one layer at a time. I saw the jurors' faces. Nothing could erase what the man with the cue ball head and glasses said. He was going to win, and I resigned myself to it. I moved on to save my family, that was all. I knew it to be true. It was all I could do. At this point, as soon as the judge called a recess, I bolted. I guess I was too focused on being out of there and having a smoke. It had been a while, and I was anxious. The smoke nearly made me choke with every puff. I finished that cigarette in record time and lit another one, took this one slowly, and tossed the pack when I was done. It was now is the time to look at the big picture. It was that moment I will never forget. I called it the bitter sweet. The sweet came in the form of a text on my phone. The voice on the other end, my new realtor, said, "We sold the house. I got your asking price." I said, "Thank you, God." I turned and told my daughter's father the good news. But there was bitter news to follow. The buyer was a heavy hitter, and we needed to get the papers faxed over to my phone, printed out, and notarized. It was no surprise to me or him since we both had a legal and construction background. We had to hurry and get this done. It was now 1:15. The court would come back from recess at 2, so I needed to get my head straight. I ran for the car. I could not wait. It was what I prayed for, and I needed to act for sure. So to get the check, we had to sign the papers to close the deal. I was sealing the action by getting the documents notarized. I had no time. The clock was ticking toward my end of freedom. So we got into the car and sped out of there because I dreaded the situation if we did not complete the task. I had to ask the nearest pharmacy if they had a notary. The person behind the counter said to me, "They are out to lunch. He told me to try the bank." They had a notary. I thanked him, and we took off to the nearest bank. My fate was hanging in the hands of 12 people on a jury. I figured there had to be a notary at the bank because they dealt in loans and money. They needed to have papers signed all the time. We arrived at the bank. I jumped out before he even put the car into gear. He said, "See, here, if you do that again, you're going to get yourself killed." I shrugged, like there was a tear in me. I felt like I didn't care, because for me, it was over, and all that mattered now was my family. I pulled out the door and inhaled deeply. and she said, "I am looking for the notary." The man, the only one there with his hand in the brown bag, said, "They are out to lunch. Try the county clerk's office. She is a notary as well as a brown bagger, too." We quickly received instructions on where to go and jumped into the car, my beautiful money-green Jaguar. I will miss her. The clock was ticking at nearly 2 p.m. We had at least 20 more minutes before they were sending the U.S. Marshals looking for me. We arrived at the county. In the clerk's office, someone said, "It's rare, but she went out to lunch." I had a hunch, thinking, my goose was cooked. I shook. My head was in dismay, and I looked down at the floor. Just at that moment, the person said, "There she is, coming through the door." I overheard her say, "I don't know why I came back, but I just needed to come back." I said, "Maybe it was for me." The woman turned to see me. There was my angel in the flesh. She even looked like one. She had blonde hair, blue eyes, and the sweetest smile. "Oh yeah, maybe so. So what can I do for you?" I gave her the cheat sheet version. "I am probably not going. To have any more time after today, I need these documents notarized." She saw my face and said to me, "Well, if God brought me back for this, it's going to be okay, baby. All is well. Whatever you are going through, I can tell. All is well." It was that interaction that helped me know what she was saying would be true, because God answered my prayer, maybe not for me, but definitely for my family. My grandmother told me, "You don't pray for yourself, but for others. God didn't save me." Well, maybe he did. At that moment, I was too upset to think that was true, but what he did was take care of my family. So it was all I cared about, whether, as long as my family was going to be okay, I could make it through this endless, horrible day. So I was able to give my family the resources they needed to get back to being my daughter's birthday. Would not be as good as the one I was able to give her in August before, because this time I was not going to be there. But I planned the whole thing, so at least she had her birthday. I tried to be there for them all. Otherwise, I prayed, saying, "God, don't let them fall." So the judge held me in prison before my sentencing, and I was not going home for my daughter's birthday, as I promised her. That day was the last day I was ever seen by the outside world. I am still here in prison, but as I said, this was about my son. He was indicted, but after what I went through with the circus of a trial, I would not allow my son to go through it, the same thing. So I made sure through prayer that it was all I had as a tool. I prayed day and night, never ceasing, as the scriptures state in Philippians 4-8. God always came through for me. My son, after all was said and done, was okay. As time went on, I prayed in my cell every minute as the situation went for my son from bad to eventually good. I received the most extreme sentence of anyone in the case. His sentence, the one he was finally given for 1 year and a day after my appeal, although I did not win, proved the U.S. attorney in my original case overstepped. The judge of the appellate court ruled. The prosecutor and our attorney in my case violated my constitutional rights. That ruling trickled down to the rest of the defendants in the case, my son being one of them. The case for the government after my direct appeal weakened and mostly fell apart. I may have received the most extreme sentence, but my son got God's saving grace. He only got a year, and a day later, all in all, he did 10 months. He missed the birth of his child by 45 days and lost his ability to use his FAA license. One thing he worked so hard to achieve was being a licensed airplane mechanic. But he is doing okay now, because I prayed and prayed, and he made the effort never to give up. As stated in Romans 12:12, He stayed in God's good graces through a loving mother's unceasing intercessory prayers, remained in God's graces because God's grace is sufficient. 2 Corinthians 9:6. He now has a great job, a great wife, and a blessed life. He is my rock while I await my fate, but I know God is in control. He is working according to his purpose for those who love him. Romans 8:28. I know God's heart, and he wants me to have hope and faith in my expected future, as stated in Jeremiah 29:11. I trust in him, and he will not fail me. He goes ahead of me and tells me to have courage and not be afraid, as in Deuteronomy 31:6. I believe he has given me these trials, so I can show those around me that God answers prayer, and he will and is answering my prayers, as stated in the Gospel of John 11:39-42. He doesn't want my heart to be troubled by only believing in his promises, because his word will not come back void. It will always go out to accomplish what it was sent to do, as stated in Isaiah 55:11. He only wants me to ask anything of his Son, and it will be given to me because he wants me to believe he is my ultimate source, as stated in the Gospel of John 14:14. I do. John 14:1, present, chapter 16, the story of the verdict. This is probably the most brutal chapter of the book, not just for me, but for my beautiful baby boy. The one who nearly died at birth was small and only 28 weeks old and didn't hit his milestones on time, according to the American Pediatric Society. His pediatrician said he would develop slowly and be small and weak. Well, thank you. Not only was my son a miracle, but his whole life was and is a blessing to me. It was not just these things mentioned, but the things I have not mentioned. I thought I had shielded him from the fate to come, but I guess I was not in control. I protected him all my life from the bad things that can happen to children. Maybe, and I'm ashamed to say it, I should have protected him from me. I am so sorry. I apologize to my baby boy, now a man with his baby boy. He didn't even get to see him born. But let me start from where I need to start, the beginning. We need to start from the beginning of the worst trial in my life. I thought I had experienced it all, but I was not even close. Those things that happened to me were just the opening act. The show was just getting started. My son was at the center of the whirlwind that was about to come into my life to create a significant storm, a shakeup that would take me from my family, my home, and my naivete, a world where I was secure, protected, and blessed, as were my children. I made sure no one was going to upset our happy home. Finally, after all, I had survived. My trial was a lesson in hope and faith. I hope that God still believes I am worthy of his love. Faith in that merciful love from God above. It was yet another August when events took place in my life that would turn it upside down, and indeed show who was in charge. It was God now. After this, there was no doubt in my mind. This could only be explained by divine intervention. We can't accept the good God blesses us with without accepting the trials of fire too. Job 1-2. This was an example of one of those things where the good in life collided with the troubles. The trial God was giving me was the actual trial in real time that was going on in that courtroom. I was there because I was naive and I loved my family. As a single mother, it fell on me to make sure my home and the children living in it were safe and protected. So, during the worst economic crisis in history, in this country, nearly 80% of it was in bankruptcy. I wanted to make sure we did not end up homeless. I needed to keep my house and take care of my kids, so I took a job, and here comes the naive part. I believed everything I was told by my boss, the owner. Long story short, it was a scam. I was the kind of person who believed everyone was good. I should have listened closer to the good news. The scriptures say in Matthew, "I send you out as sheep amongst the wolves, to be as cunning as snakes, but as innocent as doves." I had the innocent part down pat, but I needed to toughen up when it came to the cunning as a snake part. Okay, it was my upbringing. Sometimes my beautiful baby boy would say to me, "Mom, sometimes you don't use the brain God gave you. You are the most brilliant, smartest businesswoman I know, but sometimes you lose hope because you are too nice." I was never a criminal, so I didn't know how criminals think. I was taken in, and I am sorry for being unaware and naive. I needed to believe he was good, my boss, because I needed the job. I was down to $2.50 in my bank account, and I had no money for gas to take my daughter to school. There was no money to pay for the utilities. It had been nearly 4 weeks since our water was shut off, and we had no water for anything. I was thankful to God that we had a pool and lived on a lake, so the resources were there without paying for them. God always provided. I knew it, but you had to see the signs. So, I was okay with the water situation. The worst of it was not having electricity and no refrigerator to keep food cold and fresh, so we made the best of the situation. We made the best of times out of the worst of times. We bought takeout, 1 Chinese chicken and broccoli, and 1 beef and snow peas. The rice was part of the package. I wanted healthy rice for my kids, so it was an extra $1 for the brown rice. My kids and I gathered whatever we could find in the couch cushions, pockets of pants, jackets, and coats hanging in the closet. It was a treasure trove. Sometimes I found cash in bills I had forgotten were there. God always provided. I knew this. He made sure that whatever we needed we could pay. Pawn shops became my best friend, and not just my family, but many families discovered the pawn shop as a modern-day cash machine. We had a lot of things to sell. So, we sold it all. Electronics got the most for resale, and next came musical instruments. My last resort was my jewelry. My son made me promise I would not sell my jewelry unless it was necessary. When the bank came knocking for the mortgage payment, it became necessary. Our electricity was off for nearly 7 months after my job was shut down by the FTC. My boss was charged with fraud, and his employees, me being one of them, were praying for dear life that we were not going to be part of the collateral damage of this man's greed and deception. That prayer had a lifespan of nearly 2 years because the feds had no case. The case was civil, and I was not named. This went on for a good 2 years, until another greedy employee saved his skin and agreed to make a deposition, which led to the case becoming criminal and him getting immunity. The person with the least number of rolls got the worst punishment. But I knew that God was taking care of me, and my children and I were not worried. This went on for a good 2 years. My indictment was a shock and knocked me off my feet. I had never been in criminal trouble in my life. This was new for me. My kids were afraid for our future. My son, the man I raised him to be, stepped up. He was now over 18 years old, and his little sister, my daughter, my little pink bundle, was barely 12 years old. She was born in August. You see, all my miraculous events happened in that month. My son was not born in August, but he was conceived in August, a miracle from God, just waiting patiently to enter the world. He was now over 18 years old, and my daughter was still a minor under the law. She was afraid that the Department of Social Services would take her away because of my impending trial. But as I said, my son stepped up, and he took temporary custody of her. The problem was with my son. Because of the lousy economy, he could not find work anywhere. No one was hiring. So, I played take your kid to work, I got him a job at the company I worked at. Now just ask yourself, would you get your kid, who you love more than life, a job if you knew anything illegal was taking place? I hope you said no, because if I had known, I would have left and never brought my son there. Yes, you guessed it. I was one of those employees, and I was praying that we would not get indicted. Everyone had to be sponsored by the state, even the governor positions my son held. I thought if I went to trial, they would leave my son alone. But that is not what happened. Once they convinced me, they were more than happy to go after my son. We got the mother. Why not go after the 2 feathers in our federal cap? Like all young men who sow wild oats, he had his share. As parents, we know this. We were teens and young once too. My son and his little issues. I called him a speed demon, and he nearly lost his license because of his habitual speeding tickets. But these were traffic violations. I came to find out that they can be used to create a criminal history for someone to get a harsher sentence. They were grasping at straws, but they found the proverbial one that broke the camel's back. They tried to use his speeding violations against him to say he had a criminal history. I had just been given a sentence of more than 10 years, and I had no criminal history at all. I feared for my son. I prayed and prayed for my son too. I unceasingly prayed for my son's and my daughter's futures. Now my prayer was saying, God, I don't care what happens to me, but please protect my children and keep them safe. Incredibly, God is fantastic, and the events that took place in August were nothing short of multiple miracles. There was a past here, and I will explain it in the next chapter so you have the whole story. But for now, it's enough to say that after my 3-day trial on the 4 expected things, they were not expected by any definition. The 4th day was interceded by divine intervention. There is no other way to describe it. You will see. First of all, I knew I lost my trial. I could see where the case was going and the looks on the jurors' faces after the prosecutor torpedoed my case in his closing statement. I did not know that the prosecution was in a federal case. Past, Chapter 17. The Man Who Saved My Life. I guess I meditate on the Word of God even when I don't know I am doing it. This is a scripture I say over and over to myself. I say this scripture sometimes, not even consciously, but I know I have said it over and over throughout the years because the words became reality. The scripture I refer to in this particular chapter states that God said he would restore to the woman all that she had lost, even from the day she lost it. 2 Kings 8:6. I believe this to be true because I can connect it to multiple events in my life. I am speaking of one event in particular. Many years ago, my life was over. I knew it when I brought it in. I remember how I felt when I opened the front door of my home to the person on the other side of the door. It was my regular mailman holding a letter in his outstretched hand. I say it was given to me because this day he had something I had to sign my name to receive. It was not a cheery greeting that day, as it usually is, but I tried to keep a smile on my face as he said, handing me the pen, "Here, you need to sign for this." I took the pen and signed my name. A moment later, he handed me the letter and my monthly fashion magazine. I took them both, thanked him with a smile, and closed the door, watching him walk away. I was waiting to read my favorite monthly magazine. I had my beverage of choice set out on the patio in my atrium, on the small table next to my red leather chaise lounge. I needed to relax after a long day of work, running errands and picking up my daughter from school. But I never opened the magazine that day. The beverage I set out got warm as the remaining ice melted in the glass. I went to the kitchen cabinet, pulled out the Pinot, and grabbed a wine glass from the other cabinet where I kept the glasses in good plates. I poured the wine into the glass. I took a sip. Okay, a gulp, of the wine. I took a deep breath and began to read the letter from the bank. It started with, "Ms. We're letting you know." Oh boy, it was not good. I knew it, but I had to finish reading it. I did not want to be like my mother, who, when she received a letter or a past due bill, stuck it in the china closet drawer in the dining room, where she put all her mail that said overdue or late. I didn't hide my head in the sand like an ostrich when things got tight financially. So, I prayed, "God, give me the strength to accept the things I cannot change, to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference between the two." The letter stated my mortgage payments were going to be increased by $500 in 30 days. Okay, 30 days. At least it was not in 5 days. I always like to look at things where the glass is half full instead of half empty. Speaking of glasses, I took the rest of the wine down and poured myself another glass. I continued to read the rest of the letter. "If you need any assistance, please call this number. Our service department is here to help." Oh yeah, I thought, can you front me at least $500 a month for the next year? Yeah, like that was going to happen. I quickly folded the letter back into its envelope when I heard my little girl cry out, "Mommy." Well, I thought that was my cue to put on that hat and take the worry hat off. I was not worried, but I was concerned, and in my mind, I was trying to put together a strategy. It's what I always did. It was my routine. First, I cried, or had a glass or two of wine. Second, I prayed for help from God to give me strength to handle it. Third, I imagined what could be done to solve the problem. I prided myself on being a problem solver. However, this was not like going and getting new tires put on the car to replace the old ones, or cooking macaroni and cheese for my daughter when she did not want to eat anything else. It was not helping my son get a new video game after the store had sold him a defective one, and they refused to exchange the bad one for one that was not defective. I did all that. "Mom, you're awesome." Yeah, well, I didn't feel awesome, but I did try to reason out the situation. I thought of a few things I could do. First, ask my boss for a raise on my weekly salary. The economy was bad, and that was not going to happen. It was because $500 was a lot for a weekly salary increase on my salary. So now I have to rely on those better angels. I went through the scriptures thinking about what Jeremiah had said. Every one of the Lord's words I ate up. I looked for a promise God had made and his Son had reinforced. I found John 14:14 saying, "Ask anything in my name, and my Father will grant it to you." Well, I kneeled and prayed, saying, "Jesus Christ, I need help with this situation, or my kids and I would be out on the street. Please give me an answer. I am begging. I am nothing without you." The days were ticking away. My son noticed that my attitude had drastically changed. He asked me, "Mom, please tell me what's wrong." I said, "Honey, it's okay. It will be okay. I hope it will be okay." He wanted to help. By now, my son was 15 years old. His baby sister was 9 years old. There was a 6-year difference between the two. Being a single mother and having to work all the time, I relied on my son to hold things down. He was responsible for taking care of his little sister. I just patted his shoulder and said, "Get your sister. We have to go to church." He said, "Mom, today isn't Sunday." I knew he was right, but we only had 2 more weeks before the 30 days were up until the bank's deadline expired. I needed to go to the source. My grandmother would always say, "Go to God. Go to his house. He will welcome you." So I got them into the car by saying, "After, we will go out and get dinner." So we all agreed to go to church, and we would go to eat after. The only thing I told my kids was, "Mommy needs to talk to God in church. I need you to pray hard to Jesus to help Mommy with this problem." So we went to our church, called Holy Cross, which was a few blocks away from our house. We drove into the empty parking lot. I thought maybe the church was locked, so I got my son to unbuckle his seatbelt and run and try the door, and he did. It's open. So I got out of the door first, then unlocked the passenger door in the back to let my daughter hop out. I wiped her clothes to get rid of the wrinkles in her cotton dress, and I brushed her hair smooth with my fingers. There, that's good. I took her hand in mine, and we walked to where her brother stood, holding the church door open. It was hot in August. The sun was beating down on us, making the stained glass windows of the church gleam and bathing them in sunlight. As soon as we entered the church, the AC hit us like an Arctic wind rush, cooling us off from the heat we just felt. It was like a few minutes in the fires of hell before we felt the coolness and peaceful atmosphere of the church inside. I told my son to keep an eye on his sister, saying, "Keep an eye on your sister. I am going down to the front to pray." No sooner did I begin my kneel, and my children followed in succession, mimicking all my moves. I steeped my hands together in a prayer position, and my daughter mirrored everything I did. I peeked out of my steepled fingers and saw the most angelic display, smiling at her. She began to say, "Baby Jesus, help my mommy, my brother, and me, please." I felt a pull from the Holy Spirit. I turned in the pew looking for the Bible, picking it up and asking, "God, direct my steps," or in this case, help me find the answer through the Holy Spirit. Only the Holy Spirit knows what and how to pray. Romans 8:26. I turned to the book of Ecclesiastes 11:1, which stated, "Cast thy bread upon the waters, for thou shalt find it after many days." I thanked God for his guidance, after blessing myself, saying, "Come on, kids, let's go get something to eat. Mommy has to work tonight." My son gave me a big smile to show me he understood what happened. "So where do you go with 2 kids in tow for dinner?" "The Great American Family Restaurant." We were within minutes sitting at the drive-thru at McDonald's, waiting in line with other families who had the same idea. Approaching the window before I could speak, my son reached into his pocket, saying, "I'm paying. What do you want?" I looked at him, not saying a word. I never had to say anything when it came to me and my son. My daughter blurted out, "Happy Meal chicken nuggets, chocolate shake, small fries, and a toy." My son and I just smiled at each other, ordering the Happy Meal, adding a fillet of fish and a 1/4 pounder with cheese, and sharing large fries. I needed a cup of black coffee, iced because it would be a long night for me. My son was going to help me, whether I liked it or not. "No, not necessary." He looked at me. "Really, Mom? Did you take a course in computers within the last 24 hours? Smart Alec." "No, I did not." He said, "Okay, then I am helping you." It was 9 p.m. when we arrived back home. My son said, "You get started. I'll help get my little sister ready for bed first. This will give you a chance to organize your thoughts." I just kissed him, and they hopped out of the car. I sat there thinking of what I was going to put in the post. I thought, "Cast your bread upon the waters." Well, the waters were the internet and social media sites. Announcing a business proposition was the bread. The only thing I could offer was the property I still owned from my divorce from my son's father. It was not habitable. It was, however, a very nice location. My daddy, the realtor, and my hero always said, "The key to the property is location, location, location." So I began the copy with that as my attention getter. Great property, Jadartu, great location. Of course, I planted a seed, or as God would say, sowed a seed to reap a harvest. So God interceded once you made an effort, a leap of faith. So before I let my son finish posting the copy, I wrote to several sites for property projects, RE investors, developers, etc. And I made sure the copy was spread out over the waters for 7 or more, as stated in Ecclesiastes 11:1-3. I prayed over all of it. I also prayed Hebrews 13:1, Psalms 92, and Psalm 34. His angels surround you and protect you from falling. God's angels would be watching. I had done everything I could. When I was done, I said, God, it's in your hands. I need your supernatural blessings. I checked it after my son dressed it up and put the finishing touches on it. From the moment I did it, I felt better than I had in the last 21 days. There were now only 5 days left until the deadline. But I would not lose hope. Everyone was telling me to talk to the bank. They might give you an extension. I just shook my head from side to side. I went to church 3 days before the bank's deadline, like a ticking time bomb in my head. I prayed, and upon leaving the church, this time I was alone. I had one more idea. God also said, I was a vessel, and I needed to be empty before he could fill me back up, and to trust him with all of my heart, mind, and soul. Psalm 34, verse 6. I cried out to him and said, God, this is my last $20. I pulled it from my wallet. I put the last bill I had into the poor box that hung on the wall as I left the church. I thought, okay, girl, that was stupid because you barely have a quarter tank of gas. But I truly had put it all in God's hands, like the woman in the Gospel of Luke who gave her last 2 coins, everything she had in the world, saying, God, I am tired of having nothing. Now, I truly am in your hands. I felt the same way. I drove home. In my mind, I was thinking of my kids not having a home. I was letting doubt creep into my mind. I tried to push it down to let the bad thoughts invade my hope. Well, when I say supernatural blessings, I mean just that. It came in the form of an email. Talk about the 11th hour Hail Mary play. I was past the 11th hour Hail Mary. The deadline had come and gone. I was a paralegal who studied and graduated in New York. I knew I had, at least until I received another certified notification letter from the bank. But the saving grace email came from a financial angel. Present. Chapter 18. The Irish. Here we have come full circle. I'm still locked up in a federal facility. I still have to pinch myself. We're 8 years old and counting. I think to myself, no, not me, Dad, insult to injury. We were in the midst of a worldwide epidemic, a history-making pandemic. Our facility has been locked down for almost 2 years. I have, from time to time, prayed to God for a better way. I've lost this sentence. The sentence I'm serving has caused so much. If not for my belief and relief in my studies, my writings and my poetry in the Bible, it would have destroyed me. Don't get me wrong, I'm not a weeping willow. On the other hand, I'm not Wonder Woman. I cannot deal with constant deprivation. I have been waiting for more than 3 years to get my teeth fixed after being hit by a heavy steel door in the head for the first time. I tried hard to take it in stride. I was blessed that my bottom teeth came over enough to cover my top teeth with a damaged tooth. I asked more than enough times why I could not get them fixed since they were broken at the facility due to carelessness. I got too many money messages after a while. You just wish you could smile. I was sometimes able to smile on the inside, but not a single person knew. I didn't know what to do. Everyone always said I was too serious. I always had to explain it all the time, making me delirious. I was furious when the dentist told me after I'd asked more than a dozen times, "When will my teeth be fixed?" I was curious to see what kind of answer would come next. Then it nearly made me irate when he said, How does it never strike you? I was incensed. My face showed such intensity, holding my jaw so tight I might break the rest of my teeth. So even with the pandemic, I've not had my teeth repaired. To be fair, it was a chance for me to be at risk with comorbidity. I thank God every day. As in Philippians 4:11, I've learned to be content in my circumstances. God has kept me healthy, while all my inmate friends tested positive for the COVID-19 virus. Thinking this was not justice. I can't chew any real solid food. I spend more time cutting everything into little pieces. The plastic thing they give the inmates is called a spork. It's a combination of a fork and spoon, and not a knife. So, it's very difficult for me to eat a decent meal, but who cares? Nothing we eat here is decent. I can't eat an apple. It's one of my favorite fruits. But the guys in the suits control our every waking moment. How we eat, when we sleep, and when we can complain to get something done. Oh, what fun! We're treated so poorly and greeted with disdain. I'm in constant agonizing pain. These authorities are more like masters, and we are the slaves. People die here. They go to their graves, not to their families. They're put in a large black bag with a zipper and held in the facility until the families are allowed to come and retrieve them. We lost 1 or 2 people within 1 month who died in the medical center, in a chair within at least 30 minutes. As stated in previous chapters, I'm here because the night my mother died, I could not pee in a cup enough for the FBOP. Yep, it was what I said. My mother was dead, and they would not even let me attend her memorial service. Instead, they punished me for grieving over my mother. I guess there's no other way to say it. My mother died, and the FBOP punished me for that death. The other woman I'm speaking of who died in the camp was born before my mother's death. That woman was like a mother to me. She was a wonderful, generous, and selfless grandmother. This should not have happened. Her name was Iris. Her job, which she did well, was as a clerk in the distro. All she wanted to do was go home and watch her grandchildren grow. But even though she was not given a life sentence, the negligence of the FBOP and lack of care left her to die on a cold concrete floor. That was the end. No more. All day she complained of chest pains, headaches, etc. They told her she was melodramatic. They told her to go back to her cell and lie down. She died that night at 10 p.m., after the night count. Before she died, she called her family to tell them, "If you don't hear from me again, it's because something bad has happened to me." It was true. I was told the next morning. Of course, they had to shut down the unicorn's work because of her death. I took a deep breath that morning from the sound of sleep to hear the news. At first, I thought she was joking. Then she said, "I would never joke about a thing like that." She was right. No one would ever joke about something like that. It devastated me because I was with her earlier that day. I swear that she was feeling out of sorts. I asked her, "Do you want me to stay with you while I was walking out to get?" And she told me, "No, you go on. I'm going home." She was very devout when it came to her faith, but I did not realize she was talking about going home as in going to heaven. I took it hard after I heard it. I grabbed my sneakers by the laces, inconsolable, and ran out to the yard. I didn't even take the time to tie them. I ran as fast as I could until I nearly tripped over my untied laces. Giving myself a breather while panting feverishly to catch my breath, I fell to the ground. No one else was around in the backfield of the yard. I cried my eyes out while lacing up my sneakers and continuing my run. I ran for a good long time. After getting my second wind, I needed to get rid of the pent-up frustration. I ran until I was finally exhausted. I had lost it, but I knew what to do. I had inquiries from many people. After finishing up with Iris's granddaughter, who is a lawyer, I always knew she did not have to die. I later found out that an inmate nurse on the outside had revived her twice. A lieutenant came on duty that night. Oh, he was a piece of work. He told the inmate to give her mouth to get away from her, or she would go to the SHU and get a report against her. The inmate nurse said, "Go ahead." She kept working at it until other COs showed up to give support to the lone CO of the unit. Now there were too many to fight with. All my life, they said they had to listen. Classified or going to be recycled into something more mutual. The lieutenant covered himself, saying, "We are not allowed to administer CPR on inmates." As soon as I heard that, I knew this was wrong. So I swore that they would be singing a different song. I wrote a letter to the warden to inquire about CPR requirements and ask if all FBOP personnel had this training. I expected a yes, but what I got was enough for the response from the warden to be called a smoking gun. The details the warden wrote would cook them up in a wrongful death suit. The warden wrote a long explanation of how the FBOP personnel, all the way up to the warden, are given extensive training. This whole thing was draining. I knew in my ears, as a paralegal, that this just did something wrong. I knew it was right here in writing. We needed to get it out without the COs catching it. We managed, through one of the women who is close to Iris's granddaughter, to get the letter to her. Her granddaughter's lawyer took it from there, and they filed the wrongful death action lawsuit against the FBOP. Psalm 34:7 says, "The angel of the Lord encamps around those who fear him, and he delivers them." God sent his angels to encamp around us and our mission because we were meant for Iris's memory, to get her and her family justice. There was a huge investigation. People were taken to testify. 1 minute, they were there in their post, and the next, they were ghosts. All the FBOPs ran for cover. That was when they fired the whole staff and brought in new people to take their places. So, we're still here because no one on the outside cares. But I know one thing to be true. As Jesus said in Scripture, "Whatever you do to the least of my brothers and sisters, you do unto me." Our Lord and Savior were in prison, and you visited him. Oh well, maybe someday we can stop looking at the incarcerated as the underclass. People will be judged as they judge others, as stated in the Gospel of Matthew. We do not deserve it. We need to do something different with all these resources, of course, and the right time to act is now. We need to have a conversation about justice more than punishment, changing the narrative because justice without mercy is merciless, as stated by Jesus in the Word of Almighty God. Past. Chapter 19. The spinning car. It happened one day, and I was not sure why. It was something about the roads being icy and slick. The drive to school that day was a difficult one. The bright sun was melting the snow. This was a terrible storm. It's a wonder anyone survived, especially me. I don't know how, but it took everything in me not to panic. The light was changing from green to red. I had to put my foot down on the brake to slow the car down. It took less than a split second, but the car had a mind of its own on the slippery, slick, and icy road. I stepped on the brake, and the car did its little ice skating dance. My car did its own 180-degree spin, and I was in a trance. I wound up in a 180-degree turnaround. Now that I was facing the oncoming traffic, cars were coming at me from all sides. I just wanted to close my eyes and hide. It would take minutes in my mind's eye for at least one, if not more, to slam into me. I braced myself for the impact, expecting the sound of metal crashing into metal, car frames crunched up into a big pile, and a tragic story on the news, but none of that ever came. I remember saying, "God, please, I don't want to die." And then I started to cry. I couldn't believe my eyes, but to my glorious surprise, the cars never touched me. I thought I was dreaming. I saw those cars streaming toward me. I was waiting to be creamed. It didn't happen. No one hit me. It was as if they went around me. I found myself as if invisible, not even there, not anywhere, as in Psalm 91. Thousands will fall by your side, but not one will hit you. Minutes later, which felt like an eternity, all I heard was a knock at my car window. "Are you all right?" I was afraid to see the sight of a man standing on that busy 4-lane highway. I said, "Where are the cars?" The man said, "The cop car is holding them back down the road." It was not due to my skills or self-control, but it felt surreal. All I could feel was my heart beating out of my chest. The rest was a miraculous blur. Now there were 4 more men on either side. I could not believe what I was seeing. These 4 men pushed my car to the far side of the 4-lane highway. I was still inside, barely listening to what the man was saying. "Just hold on. You do not have to do a thing." I think I was in shock. "It will be okay," he said to me. I was shaking and quaking. My body was vibrating with so much fear. If anybody touched me, I might just explode. My composure was eroding around me when the stranger opened the driver's side door to get behind the wheel. Turning the wheel right and listening to the squealing of the brakes, he put the car in neutral to allow the other men, 4 in all, 1 stocky, the other 3 tall. I thought maybe they played basketball. I told them. I was on my way to school up the turnpike. They said, "That will be quite a hike." I was frozen for a moment, possibly in shock, as I listened to my watch tick-tock. It took me a moment to take stock of the situation. They said, "We will push you across the street to that gas station on the corner." The man behind the wheel could feel my body shaking just by looking at me. He knew I was in no shape to handle any of that, so he moved the seat in the car that was pushed forward. I was only 5 feet, 1 inch tall, while he was more than 6 feet tall. He asked me, "Do you need anything? Could I call someone for you?" As soon as he helped get my car to the gas station at the corner, I thanked the Good Samaritan and went to get some hot cocoa to warm me up. I no sooner turned to ask him if he wanted a cup. "Would you like some hot cocoa, my treat?" He was gone. I went outside to thank the others, and they were also gone. I looked up and down the highway. It couldn't have been more than a few minutes. Where were they? I thought, but they were nowhere to be found. I went and looked around the convenience store inside the gas station. I implored the attendant. "Did you see where those 4 men went?" He said. "I guess they went back to where they were sent." I said to myself, "What I don't understand." The young man said, "Not your time, not God's plan. There is more for you." I just stood there, shaking. I don't know if it was the cold or something deeper. I thought it brought to mind that a cat has 9 lives. For a small but fleeting moment, I remembered what my grandmother told me. "Angels walk among us. You are protected, baby girl." Pretty's End, Chapter 20, The Miracle Book. I want to end this book on a positive note. When I decided to publish my writing, it wasn't my idea. It was divine intervention that stepped in like a long-lost friend. I should start from the beginning. I have always wanted to write, but try as I might, I could never get it right. I was also afraid. I was scared of everything. When I was a little girl, I was scared of rejection. I had suffered so much through my life. I never thought I could succeed at anything. So I thought, who would ever want to read my stuff? It was rough, and I was very green to the author's scene. I didn't know how to go about being published. It was my mother, of course, rest her soul, who took on that role to motivate me to see that my writings were good. She wanted me to publish. I agreed that it was publish or perish, as the writer's creed goes. Well, I started with poetry and prose. I knew less about these than the nose on my face. I didn't want to write, and I put up a perfect fight. It was that one night, the night that changed my life. There was a night that I will never forget. I don't regret anything I did, but this night I hid from my demons of the past. It was the night I heard God's voice loud and clear. He was here, in prison with me. As the Gospel of Matthew says, when in prison you came to my cell. Well, it was true. He told me he would hold me down and protect me. He would send his angels to encamp around me, as stated in Psalm 34:7. He told me to write down everything that was swirling in my head. Instead, I refused. I said no. I had never said no to God before. Well, I had nothing to lose, so God told me to choose. But for 5 nights, he kept grilling me. I didn't get one wink of sleep. God said, "You will get a peaceful snooze when you agree to me." I said to God, "You see, I can't do this. I have never said no to you before, so this one time, stop bothering me. I don't want to hear it anymore." Well, I guess that angered him, because if I were God and someone said no to me, I would have been incensed. So the next 5 nights were, to say the least, intense. Well, he won. I couldn't take one more night of being up with the sun. I needed rest, so I agreed. I wrote about what was in my head. Well, I did my best. That's all that can be said. I took a pen and pad in the middle of a very long night, and the giant spotlight out my window gave me very little light. I began to write. I wrote well into the night. I wrote well. I don't know what I wrote. I didn't even put my glasses on, but after I was done, I guess it was well after 1. I placed it down on the desk, turned around, put my head down, and went to bed. The following day, around 9 a.m., I woke to my Bunkie shaking me. "Get up. We have to go to work, Bunkie," she said. She then spotted the pad on the desk, picked it up, and began to read it. "What's this?" she said. I said to her something like, "Something I could not ignore anymore." She said to me, "This is good." I said, "It was just something." I couldn't get it out of my head. It wouldn't let me go to bed until I wrote it down. That was an understatement. My Bunkie looked at me with widened eyes, curiously. So that's how it began. The poetry flowed out of me like a fountain, unable to turn off the faucet. There were 2, or sometimes 3 days, no way. You say, well, I was amazed. Since I never wrote poetry before in all my days, my mom read them, saying, "These have to be published." So before she died, my mom tried to find me a publisher. Yes, her, my mother, a little 82-year-old lady. She became my best critic and my partner. She supported me while alive, and I believe she still does in spirit. But unfortunately, to this day, 400 poems and counting have not yet been realized. The publishing of Poetry from Prison, volumes 1, 2, 3, and 4, has not yet borne fruit. But God, in Isaiah 3:10, told me I would eat the fruits of my doings, all my doings. So there is a time for everything, as stated in Ecclesiastes 3. But don't fret, not yet. Because while writing the poetry, it occurred to me to try to write novels, so I did. So far, I have written for the last 7 years in some series of different kinds. Some of my manuscripts depict adventure, exotic places, and various themes, with exciting characters and storylines. Some are about my life, like this one, which brings joy and tears. I proceeded after my mom's passing to finish what she started before she departed this world to go to another. However, I didn't know where to turn. So I went to the ultimate source, the only one I knew, through all of my life's challenges and strife. God says in John 14:1, "Let not your heart be troubled." So I put it in his hands, Let go. Let God. I ask God through his Son, as stated in John 14:14. Anything you ask for in my name, my Father will give to you, and I will give it to you. Just as Jesus knew in John 11:39-42, God answers prayers, and he will answer me. So I prayed to get my first novel published. I prayed day and night, unceasingly, as stated in Psalm 102, verse 6. One day I went to Corlinks. It's the email or correspondence we use in prison. I logged into my account, and in my inbox was an email that stated, anyone who is writing in prison and is interested in getting their manuscript published should respond to this email. It was right there. So I answered with a response saying, okay, I am looking to get my first novel published. Some of the proceeds will go to my family and other families of the incarcerated for a second chance. I signed my name and logged off. It gave me such pause. I went back to my cell. I was so full of the Holy Spirit. I didn't know how to pray, as stated in Romans 8:26, but the Holy Spirit knew how I should pray. I wanted to thank God, as written in 1 Thessalonians 5:18. To always be thankful in all circumstances, for this is God's will for you who belong to Jesus Christ. The next day, the email I sent was answered. Here is the response. Let us see what you have. I sent back a response saying I would need to type it up. She wrote back her response saying, okay, get it underway and keep in touch. We are very interested. When I finished reading the email without hesitation, a smile a mile wide emerged on my face. I couldn't hide the feeling of happiness inside, but my joy and elation were very short-lived. The following email I received deflated me. I couldn't do it the way they wanted it. I guess that was that. It must be a word. She wrote back, I am in prison. I wrote, we don't have words. She wrote back to me saying, we can do it for you for $150. I said to myself, I don't have $150. So I guess I decided to let it go. I just stayed hopeful and never stopped praying. I was not a quitter. I never gave up. As stated in Romans 12:12, I don't know, but my smile disappeared. All that was left were tears. But I regrouped, saying, as in Exodus 14:13, move forward, and God will lead you to victory. Well, God does indeed work in mysterious ways, so keep that thought in mind as we travel forward several months, because the story is just getting good. By now, you know I believe in angels, as in Hebrews 13:1. Beware of how you treat strangers, because you might be entertaining angels unaware. It was nearly the holidays. Here in prison, it's tough to celebrate Christmas and New Year's since all your fears have been realized. Some say it's not wise to hope or have faith. It's just an endless waiting game. Well, my new angel came in the form of a woman named Kay. She came into the facility around October. We met when she came up to me after Mass. I was in the choir. She said to me after hearing me sing, hey girl, your vocals are on fire. I told her, thank you. She wanted to join the choir and sing duets with me. Our two voices blended beautifully. I said, well, that would be nice. We'll see. She said, you bet we'll see. We were instant friends. She believed in me. Not many did. It was not easy to make friends behind these walls. I was not popular, not someone who had been through the system since this was my first crime and my first time. It was her too, so we both knew what each of us was going through. It didn't take long for me to open up to her, and we were thick as thieves. We worked out together and sang together. One day, when the weather was not good for either working out or singing, we were locked in our cells. I gave her some of my writing to keep her busy. She said to me, I insist. I told her, being honest with me. She spent the weekend reading my writings and told me she loved them. It was a succinct, bittersweet, and sweet compliment. We talked about my writings in detail. She loved the characters, saying, once I got published, she would follow my books continuously. It made me feel melancholy and hopeless. She said, that should make you feel good. What she was saying should have made me feel good, but it just made me feel hopeless and lost. She said to me, what's wrong? I thought you would be happy. I began to cry, telling her everything. She said to me, all is well. It's going to be okay, as she wiped my tears away. I handed her a copy of the email response from the publisher. Without fail, true to form, as lovely as she was looking at the email. It's okay. We will make this work. Wait and see. I said, I have no money. She told me that John 14:1 says to trust in God and His Son. Let not your heart be troubled. We will get this done. Well, as I said, God was working on a process in me, and what He promised would not come back void, as written in Isaiah 55:11. I did not know His ways, since His ways were higher than mine, as written in Isaiah 55:8. I knew I trusted in Him, and He would do it because He worked well for all who loved Him, as written in Romans 8:28. My friend, with no more words, began to write an email to her office. Okay, guys, it's me. I have an assignment for you. I am sending a manuscript to someone, and I need it done ASAP. The 5 of you put everything aside. This is priority 1. Each of you taps the art part and puts it on paper, making sure it's edited and doesn't change anything in it. But the editing part needs to be completed by this week. KL. I saw the email she was writing, and I began to say, hey, wait, I told you I had no money. That is a lot of work. She said to me, it's okay. I didn't ask you for any money. I looked at her, and the tears began to sit on the rim of my eyes. I could feel them beginning to fall, and I started to cry. Why? I spoke. She said to me, because I can, and you are my friend. I told her with great appreciation, thank you, my friend. She just looked at me. I am a messenger only. As I said at the beginning of this, it was divine intervention that stepped in for my long-lost friend. Less than 3 months later, my angel was gone. As I said, I believe she was here just for me. It was like she appeared on a cloud and left the same way. I have not seen or heard from her since, but my first book was on Amazon.com. It is important that people understand that God's hand is here, every step of the way. Sorry to say, being in prison does not make it easy to promote a book. So if you are reading this book and like my writings, you might want to take a look at the one that is published, because part of the proceeds of all my writings go to the incarcerated, the hopeless, the helpless, the homeless, single mothers, and the fatherless, all of God's children. If we do not help the incarcerated and their families today, there is every chance that they will become the hopeless, helpless, and homeless of tomorrow. So, with great sorrow, I say, I know no other way to say we can all be angels by being there for each other, our sisters and brothers of every race, to see the faces of those who are in need. God says, when there is a need to plant a seed, many seeds breed a harvest of generosity, as written in 2 Corinthians 9:6-8. Past chapter 21. The conclusion. It's been many years and my hate and fears have changed. I've learned a lot. I've done things inside that I was afraid to do on the outside. This reminds me of a statement made by Red in the movie Shawshank Redemption. An older inmate, Brooks, was finally released from prison after 50 years, but he couldn't adapt. Red said, Brooks, inside is a big man, educated and well-read, a big fish in a small pond. But on the outside, he is just an old man who couldn't even get a library card. What I'm trying to say is that here, I had the freedom to help those who needed me. It's like when Jesus went back to his hometown and people said, "Isn't he just the carpenter's son?" They didn't see him as anyone special, but with strangers, they listened to his every word and marveled at his miracles. His friends and family couldn't accept him, and so they missed out on his gifts and miracles. They expected him to disappoint them. I felt the same way on the outside. Can someone be freed from captivity? I guess it depends on your perception. Philippians 4:11 says, "I have learned to be content with my circumstances." And Philippians 4:13 says, "I can do all things through Christ, who strengthens me." Another statement from Shawshank Redemption by the character Andy Dufresne said, "Hope is a good thing, maybe the best of things, and no good thing ever dies." Hebrews 11 talks about the expectation of what we cannot see, the parade of the faithful as our witness. Many of us inside fear the future. I remember someone telling me what FEAR means, false evidence, appearing real. It means we are afraid of things that are fake or non-existent. Now I know I am walking in the light. Before, I wasn't. It's not a sin to begin again and accept defeat. God is the potter, and we are the clay. He tears us down to our most basic elements and rebuilds us. Take it from someone who spent her life resisting being broken down. I told the judge on the day of my verdict, "You will never break me." I stand by that, but it wasn't the man who broke me. It was God. It took a long time, but I finally surrendered to his will because I had to trust him completely. Like someone being rescued from drowning, if you don't surrender to the rescuer, you can pull them under with you. You both drown instead of surviving through surrender. To surrender is not to accept defeat, but to allow victory. God said, "I go before you. Always come, follow me." You must be courageous enough to give in, as in Deuteronomy 31:8. That doesn't mean giving up. Those are two different things. God never wants us to give up. He wants us to take a leap of faith. Throughout the Bible, it strikes me that God has much patience. I don't know if I or anyone else could have put up with all the complaints people made throughout history when they had to work at something. But God always stepped in and brought results, as written in Jeremiah 29:11 through 23. "You will seek my face once I help you. You will find me, and I will be found by you once I have given you hope for your expected end." God wants to do everything for us, but first, we must go to him and ask, as written in Matthew 7:7. "I am not accepting defeat because soon I will be back on the street. I want everyone to know that my life is different because I am different. I will no longer challenge my Creator. I am no longer a hater. I am stronger because of my weaknesses. God is my unending source. It takes perseverance and effort. That is something I have always risen to fulfill. Still, I know that now it will be what it will be, if it is God's will. I am far from done. I am still standing, but I understand that I am not special. I just know that there are angels in my life surrounding me with powerful protection. All my life, I have been afraid of rejection. This is not unusual according to science. Many people lack substance and purpose because of their irrational fears. I, for one, am not going to be one of them moving forward. I embrace my life, having been through so much hardship and strife. I hope that when my readers pick up this book, they keep an open mind. God and his angels can be so very kind. Those who are God's chosen will be full of the Holy Spirit, allowing them to move forward and embrace miracles. Albert Einstein, the great physicist, said, "There are only two ways to live your life. One is as though nothing is a miracle, The other is as though everything is a miracle. So, I am finished living my life in fear. I am going to embrace my better angels and live my life in faith. In this small but profound testimonial of my life, I have tried to prove that one thing is possible, since all things are possible with God, and nothing is impossible, because it means I'm possible. Angels are not just for kids. We adults see and need them too. 1 John 4:18-19 says, "Such love has no fear, because perfect love expels all fear. We love each other because He loved us first. He sent His angels to protect us wherever we went. They would hold us up with their hands and never let us get hurt or be in harm's way." Psalm 91:11-13. Thank you for letting me show you that we are never alone, and that God will send His angels to encamp around us. Psalm 34, verse 7. Look around. They are there. I hope you like my book, and I might have a second volume. Angels are not just for kids. Maybe you will let me know that you have angels protecting you too. Submission Department. Dear Sir, Madam, I am submitting my latest book, Angels Are Not Just for Kids, for your consideration. I hope you find it as compelling and inspiring as the women here in my prison facility have. This book aims to spread a spirit of hope, emphasizing that we can support each other as God intended. I believe that with your help, this message can reach a wider audience. As a new author, I am seeking a publisher for my Christian books. Alongside Angels Are Not Just for Kids, I am also writing a series of poetry books titled Poetry from Prison, A Walk Through the Human Spirit, which includes Volume Number 1, Hope, Volume Number 2, Faith, Volume 3, Love, Volume 4, Humility. I am praying that you will consider publishing my work and helping me share my writings with the world. Enclosed, please find the complete manuscript of my book and a self-addressed stamped envelope, SASE, for your response. Thank you for your time and consideration. Have a blessed day. Sincerely,